Chapter 633. Atop Mount E's Jade Gown Peak, Yong Fu was drinking wine with a yellow-robed cultivator, chatting and laughing merrily. The eldest disciple, Bai Jing, hid far away and stared at the man with undisguised disgust in his eyes. The man had prominent cheekbones, slightly sunken eyes, short and thick eyebrows, and a sinister glint in his eyes. Light flickered uncertainly as if he was constantly plotting something. At this moment, he suddenly put down his wine cup and walked to the edge of the cliff. Looking at the mountains hidden in the misty sea of clouds, he sighed. In the past, several elders of my Xiangqing sect were killed by Shen Baishuang, and I was also driven out by him. I always remember this humiliation in my heart, constantly thinking of returning to Shenwu Mountain to rebuild the sect. Taoist Yong smiled. Brother Guangyuan erected a stone tablet in front of Chu and named it the Inkheart Stone. I presume this is your intention. The yellow-robed cultivator turned around and said loudly, "That's right." He took a few steps back to the table and placed his hand on the table, looking down at Yong Fu. Although I thought of returning every day, fellow Taoist Yong was previously in charge of Immortal City and could be considered one of us. The Deep Abyss School has long lost its former prestige, so I didn't meddle. However, I heard that Taoist Shen sent a martial nephew to the school and used despicable methods to seize fellow Taoist's position. This truly made me sympathize with him and filled with righteous indignation. I was thinking of how to seek justice for fellow Taoist. Taoist Yong cupped his hands. Brother Guangyuan is righteous, I thank you in advance. Although he spoke politely, he didn't take it seriously. Back when Shen Baishuang expelled the Xiangqing sect, he saw that Wang Guangyuan was only a core formation junior, so he spared his life. Later on, it was also due to this person's good fortune that he actually met a good master and cultivated bitterly for nearly 300 years, only achieving the Yuanying realm a few years ago. So what if he came back before? This time, he just happened to find an excuse. However, since this person was willing to stand up for him, there was no harm to him, so he naturally wouldn't stop him. He only reminded him out of morality. Taoist Zhang's cultivation is extremely high. I don't know what kind of Taoist technique he used to injure the profound weapon I borrowed from Taoist Feng. There was also the guest elder from his sect. His fighting skills were also quite brilliant. All in all, even though the Hanyuan sect does not have a great cultivator like Jinrenshin in charge, it is not to be underestimated. Fellow Taoist Wang, you must be careful. Hearing this, Wang Guangyuan actually burst into laughter. Waving his hand, he replied, "So Brother Yong is worried about this matter. I was wondering why I wasn't as forthright as before. So it turns out that you have this layer of apprehension. Fine, I will tell you the truth. I didn't come alone, and my senior apprentice brother Chu Changji has also promised me this. I will do my best to help you. Enlightened Master Chu is here too." Yong Fu's heart shivered slightly. His hand that had just picked up the wine cup trembled uncontrollably. He then slowly brought it to his mouth and drank it slowly. This was to cover up his loss of composure. He had heard of this enlightened Master Chu for a long time. He had achieved Yuanying a few hundred years ago. This person was naturally aggressive and was not someone to be trifled with. He didn't know what level his cultivation had reached. If this person also came to help, it meant that Wang Guangyuan was not the only one behind this. It wasn't as simple as it seemed. Previously, he was just brushing it off. Now, he had no choice but to take this matter seriously. Because he guessed that there seemed to be more to this matter, he asked a few questions from the side. However, Wang Guangyuan's mouth was very tight and did not leak any information. Seeing this situation, Yong Fu no longer persisted and asked, "Does Brother Guangyuan think that Gao Zhongyuan is to your liking?" This time, Wang Guangyuan nodded repeatedly. Of course. This person's aptitude is excellent. I have already accepted him as my personal disciple. In the future, he will inherit my mantle. I still have to thank fellow Taoist Yong for recommending such an excellent disciple. I heard that he was originally from the Hanyuan sect. How could that small sect accommodate my disciple? In my opinion, Zhongyuan's future achievements will be limitless. Yong Fu was astonished. He also knew that Gao Zhongyuan's aptitude was good, but he didn't think that Wang Guangyuan's evaluation of him would be so high. However, this person's heart was not righteous. Even if Gao Zhongyuan's aptitude was twice as high, Yong Fu still wouldn't accept him as a disciple. Wang Guangyuan glanced at Yong Fu, a strange smile appearing on his face. From his sleeve, he took out a letter and placed it down. Pushing it over, he said, "Little brother came out in a hurry this time and didn't bring any attendants. Only brother Yong can deliver this letter to the Hanyuan sect on my behalf." Yong Fu looked at the large Chu character stamped on the seal of the letter and couldn't help but frown. He didn't extend his hand to accept the letter. Instead, with some caution, he asked, "What's written in the letter?" Although he was happy to see Wang Guangyuan step forward and fight, he didn't want the Mount E sect to be dragged into the water for no reason and be used by others. Wang Guangyuan snorted and said, "Brother Yong, don't worry. This letter was brought by me from Zhongtai. According to the rules, if the Immortal City's overseer is changed, then Zhongtai can collect an additional sum." Yong Fu asked doubtfully, "It's that simple?" Wang Guangyuan nonchalantly said, "It's just that the amount collected is a bit more than before." Yong Fu's mind raced like lightning, immediately guessing Wang Guangyuan's intentions. I was wondering why he was so confident, as if he didn't care about Zhang Zhenren at all. So it turns out he's borrowing the Zhongtai sect's name. But from this, it could be seen that even if Zhang Yan was expelled, it would no longer be his turn to be the overseer of the Immortal City. Thinking up to this point, he immediately lost interest. But he still had to give Yong Fu face. Putting away the letter, he indifferently said, "In a moment, I'll send someone to deliver it to the Hanyuan sect. What happens next has nothing to do with my Mao Yi sect." Wang Guangyuan smiled deeply and retreated a few steps. Standing there, he said, "Brother Yong, why must you say things in such a way? It won't be too late to discuss it in detail with me in a few days." In the Seven Treasures Pagoda, there was a thumb-sized scorpion spider crawling around on Zhang Yan's table. The insect's entire body was reddish gold, and there were a few circles of faint markings on its carapace. At first glance, it looked like a strange and exquisite copper button. At this moment, the doubts in his heart were resolved. No wonder the scorpion spider was so ferocious, attacking him without caring about the loss of vitality the moment it escaped from the ice plate. Later on, it desperately swallowed the shellfish pearl. So it was all because it wanted to give birth to this young spider. His gaze fell. The mother spider must have given the last bit of spiritual energy it swallowed to the young spider. It was strange that it could still give birth to it after being trapped in the ice plate for thousands of years. Especially the golden red color on its body that was different from normal scorpion spiders. It had never been recorded in the ancient records. Zhang Yan also began to calculate in his heart. It was appropriate for the poisonous insect to nourish the Panchan pill to be a different species, followed by longevity and cultivation. Although the scorpion spider was young, it looked rather extraordinary. If he were to feed it the silk lotus seed from now on, he did not know whether or not the precious pill it produced would be able to satisfy his needs. After thinking for a moment, he decided to give it a try. Although the silk lotus seed was rare, with the Immortal City in his hands, he did not lack a few. However, in order to prevent any accidents, he had no choice but to find more poisonous insects in the future. But just now, the Immortal City had changed hands. He could not easily leave the mountain for the time being. He could only wait a year or two before making plans. During this period of time, he needed to first gather all the easy-to-find medicinal ingredients in the Immortal City. Only then could he concentrate on finding those rare treasures. At this moment, a voice came from outside the door. "Manor Head, a messenger from the Mount E sect has arrived. He said that he has an important matter to discuss with Manor Head personally." Because the Mount E sect had the Yuanying Great Elder Yong Fu, Zhang Yan attached more importance to him than the other sections. Seeing that he had come to visit in such a solemn manner as a messenger, he deduced that it must be something important. Thus, he said, "I understand." He took out a jade box and stored the scorpion spider in it, placing it in his sleeve. Then, he floated down from the 7-story pavilion to the lowest floor. After sitting down behind the table, he instructed the boy beside him, "Let him in." The boy held a gong and knocked on the jade chime. After a while, the manor door opened and a young cultivator with a strong figure walked in. When he saw Zhang Yan, he bowed and said, "By Jing, disciple of the Mount E sect, greets manor head." Zhang Yan gently raised his hand and smiled. "Martial nephew Bai, you may dispense with the formalities. If fellow Taoist Yong has something to say, a single letter would suffice. There's no need to send martial nephew back and forth." Bai Jiang straightened up and said in a deep voice, "Teacher was entrusted by someone with an important letter to deliver to manor head. Because it's not a trivial matter, I ordered martial nephew to make a trip here." When he finished speaking, he took out a letter covered in gold lacquer. A boy walked over and took the letter, then delivered it to Zhang Yan's table. After Zhang Yan flipped through it, his eyes flashed. "Thank you for your trouble, martial nephew. When you return, please send my regards to fellow Taoist Yong." Bai Jiaying's objective had been achieved. Not wanting to stay any longer, he bowed and turned to leave the hall. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment, then instructed the boy beside him, "Go and summon junior martial brother Chu." The boy obeyed and left. After an hour, Chu Muron hurried over and apologized profusely. "This little brother just now, I was invited by the Changshan sect master to be a guest. I've come late. Please forgive me for making manor head wait for so long." Zhang Yan waved his hand, indicating that it was fine. He then handed over the letter and said, "Junior martial brother, take a look." Chu Muron hastily accepted the letter. After reading its contents, his expression changed. Zhang Yan asked, "Has there ever been an upper sect before?" Chu Muron thought about it carefully and nodded. "Yes, there has been. The sects of Mount Shenwu also worship the Zhongtai sect as the upper sect in name. However, because our sects are located in the northern lands, the upper sect has never paid attention to us. As a result, the number of upper sects we receive is very small. I heard that every year, we only receive 100th or 200th of the Immortal Cities collection." When Master Shen was still around, he never paid any attention to us. After Master Yong took over, things changed slightly. Because his Tao companion is a disciple of the Zhongtai sect, it became a little more interesting. 100th or 200th, Zhang Yan smiled. "But this letter says that 60% of the collection will be taken. How much will be left?" Chu Muron said doubtfully, "Manor head, of all places, I suspect that the Emshan sect is behind this?" Zhang Yan declined to comment. Instead, he smiled and asked, "If this is really the intention of the Zhongtai sect, what does junior martial brother think we should do?" Chu Muron hesitated for a long time. Sweat slowly seeped out of his forehead. Finally, he lowered his head and said, "Manor head, the Zhongtai sect is powerful. If this is really the case, then in my opinion, we should just submit." Chapter 634. Zhongtai sect was one of the 5 major sects in the Dongxing continent. 1,000 years ago, there were even 3 Dongtian Taoists in the sect. Even though it was not as powerful as before, it was still very powerful. In Priest Chu's eyes, the Shenwu mountain world was just a small part of the continent. How could it compete with such a big sect? Thus, he felt that if this letter was real, then the only path he could take was to obey. Zhang Yan looked at his panicked expression and shook his head with a smile. "Jinren Shen was 100 times better than me in the past, but I don't think Zhongtai sect could do anything to us. Why are you so afraid now, junior brother Chu?" When Taoist Chu heard Zhang Yan's words, he realized that Zhang Yan had the intention to compete with him. He immediately turned pale with fright and said, "Manor head, please reconsider. Zhongtai sect is powerful. It's impossible for my sect to compete with them." Zhang Yan smiled and pressed his hand down. "All right, I understand junior brother's intentions." Then he waved his hand. "You can go back first." Priest Chu wanted to persuade him, but since Zhang Yan sent him away, it was not good for him to say anything else. Helplessly, he bowed and left. Zhang Yan thought for a while in the pagoda, then said, "Teng, go and invite junior brother Zhao here." After Chu Mu left the pagoda, he returned to the cave residence with a face full of worry. The concubine saw his expression and asked, "Master, what's wrong?" Priest Chu was also annoyed, so he told her the ins and outs of the matter. He then sighed and said, "How can this Zhongtai sect be provoked? However, from what I can see, it seems like the mansion master wants to compete with him. If that is the case, a great disaster will befall our Deep Abyss school." The concubine comforted him. "Master, maybe they purposely used Zhongtai sect's name?" Priest Chu sighed. "I thought about it later. The seal on the letter was indeed from Zhongtai sect. I'm afraid it's not fake." The concubine panicked and said, "But when Jinren Shun was here, nothing happened, right?" Priest Chu shook his head and said, "It's different, it's different. Teacher Shin was at the 3rd level of Yuanying back then, so the Zhongtai sect naturally didn't dare to act rashly. But Manorhead's cultivation is far from that. Perhaps he still had the courage to resist when he was facing the Mount Ame sect, but when he was facing the colossus of the Zhongtai sect, he had completely lost his confidence. He spun a few rounds on the spot. He stopped short. He said, "No, I need to discuss this with junior brother Wen and junior brother Zhao. We must try to persuade the manor head." With a stomp of his foot, he flew out of the cave. He first went to the lower house to look for Zhao Gu. But when they arrived at the latter's cave abode, the disciple said that he had been invited by Sun Tong, the head of the Wui school, to discuss the Tao in his residence. He was afraid that he would not be able to come back in a short period of time. After hesitating for a long time, he decided to look for Taoist One to discuss. Taoist One was meditating in the cave. Seeing that Chu Muron had come to visit, he said happily, "I heard that senior brother has been running around for the manor head and has been very busy these few days. How did you find the time to visit me?" Chu Muron let out a long sigh. After sitting down, he told him in detail about Wang Guangyuan's letter and Zhang Yan's visit. In the end, he said, "Our Hanyuan school is already far better than before. It doesn't matter even if we take a few steps back. Why must we risk the disaster of annihilation and insist on competing with the Zhongtai sect? Let's not talk about other things." If this news were to spread, the disciples who were summoned would definitely be disbanded. After Taoist One heard this, he was furious and said, "If the Zhongtai sect wants to come, then let them. Why should I, Wen Liang, be afraid of them? If they have the ability, then go ahead and take this head of mine. As long as my spirit is not destroyed, when I reincarnate, I will still seek trouble with them." "Sigh, junior brother Wen, you have such a fiery temper." Chu Muron stomped his feet and complained, "The manor head came from another continent and doesn't know much about the matters of Dongsheng. Why are you so unreasonable? Is the Zhongtai sect something that we can afford to offend? You are trying to drag our Hanyuan school to eternal damnation." Taoist One said disdainfully, "Senior brother Chu, you are too spineless. You want our Hanyuan school to be at the mercy of others? I will not allow it." Chu Muron said anxiously, "Zhongtai sect is a superior sect to begin with. There is no harm in paying a little more. Why are all of you so inflexible?" Taoist One suddenly stood up and pointed at Taoist Chu, scolding, "Bullshit. What Zhongtai sect? Our Hanyuan school is now a superior sect of Qinsong. Why should we care about others? Chu Muron, let me tell you, if you want to drag out an ignoble existence, go ahead and do it like Gao Zhongyuan. No one will stop you." When he finished, he flicked his sleeves and stormed in angrily. Chu Muron's face turned red and white. He knew that he had spoken without thinking and said something he shouldn't have. Suddenly, as if he had lost all his strength, he slumped into the chair. But he didn't know that at this moment, inside the cave, the concubine was affected by his pessimistic mood, and she was a little distracted. When she was fiddling with a fragrant flower, she inadvertently glanced around and saw a lifelike red paper crane on the window lattice. Her beautiful face couldn't help but change slightly, and she said to the maid behind her, "You can leave first." She looked at the paper crane with a complicated gaze and took it with trembling hands. She opened it and took a glance before closing it tightly again. She frowned and paced back and forth in the room, sitting up and standing up a few times. In the end, she bit her lips and went back to the inner room to take out a passage talisman and a flying artifact shaped like a lotus flower. She put them in the pouch and then went outside to take care of the maidservant, saying, "If master comes back, Tell him that I'm bored in the residence and have to go out for a few rounds. The maidservant only said, Madam, please come back early. I'm afraid master will be worried if you're late. The concubine said unhappily, There's no need for you to be so nosy. She threw the artifact on the ground and stepped on it. She chanted a spell in her heart and in an instant, she soared into the sky and flew out of the mountain. Now that the deep cave sect had opened up 100 miles of land, the sect was not as narrow as before. After she left the mountain, she still had to walk for a while before she could leave the mountain. Even though she had Chu Muron's talisman in her hand, she was still extremely careful. She managed to avoid the patrolling disciples every time she ran into them. More than 2 hours later, she exited the boundary of Cold Abyss and headed west to a maple forest. After circling around a few times, she saw a young cultivator standing on top of a tree under the bright moon. She also pressed down on her magic tool and slowly descended. She said coldly, Gao Zhongyun, didn't you leave? Why are you looking for me again? Gao Zhongyun chuckled and said, Xin Yang, after following that good-for-nothing Chu Muron, you've become quite arrogant. Have you forgotten what you've done for me? Xin Yang was slightly flustered and said, You said that after I've done that for you, you'll never disturb me again. Gao Zhongyun blushed and said, That was then and this is now. If you believe me, it only means that you're stupid. Moreover, it wasn't easy for me to plant you as a hidden chess piece. Of course, you'll be put to good use. Xin Yang begged, I just want to live a peaceful life. Junior apprentice brother Gao, please let me go. Peaceful life? Gao Zhongyuan scoffed and said, The deep cave sect is going to be annihilated soon. How can you live a peaceful life? Xin Yang shook her head in panic and said with a trembling voice, It won't happen. With Zhenren Zhang here, and he's Zhenren Shun's apprentice nephew, how could anything happen to the deep cave sect? It won't happen, Zhenren Zhang? Gao Zhongyun said sarcastically, I'm not afraid to tell you that my teacher is on Mount E now. I also have eldest uncle Chu Changji who will be arriving soon. We're going to take over the celestial city. I'm afraid that Taoist Zhang won't be able to protect himself. By then, it's still uncertain who the deep cave sect will be. Xin Yang's face turned pale and said, What do you want me to do? Gao Zhongyun smiled and said, That's right. Listen, it's very simple. Chu Muron has a treasure left behind by Shen Baishuang. Its power is extraordinary. I want you to steal it so that Taoist Zhang won't be able to use it. Xin Yang's face was filled with fear and she said anxiously, Master, that treasure is kept by you. How can I get it? Gao Zhongyun looked at her deeply and said leisurely, I know you have a way. After he finished speaking, he laughed loudly and didn't pay any more attention to the woman. He turned into a wisp of smoke and flew into the sky. After Zhao Ge returned to the sect from Su Yi School, he heard that Zhang Yan had summoned him. He did not bother to tidy up his clothes and rushed to greet him. When he reached the peak, he saw Zhang Yan standing at the edge of the cliff with his hands behind his back. He carefully went forward and bowed, Greetings, headmaster. Zhang Yan turned around and smiled, Junior apprentice brother Zhao, don't be so reserved. I summoned you here to ask you about something. You've been to Chu recently. Do you know anything about the changes? Zhao Ge thought for a while and said hesitantly, There's something big, but I'm not sure if it counts. Zhang Yan said, Tell me about it. Zhao Ge sorted out his thoughts and replied, This matter has been going on for a long time. Further east from the state of Chu is the state of Grand Qi. Both states are roughly the same in terms of territory. However, over 100 years ago, because of a small matter, a disagreement arose between the two states. Both sides repeatedly waged war against each other. I heard that both sides suffered heavy casualties. When I returned to the state of Chu, I heard that the two states were fighting again. Qi was where the other big sect, Xianyu sect, was located. The war between the two countries was actually a battle between Zhongtai sect and Xianyu sect. Zhang Yan thought to himself, this Xianyu cult can fight evenly with Zhongtai Pai, so their strengths must be similar. If that's the case, why does Zhongtai Pai still have time to meddle in the affairs of the northern part of Shenwu Mountain? There must be more to this. At this moment, Zhang Boyan walked in from outside. Zhang Yan raised his head and looked at him with an inquiring gaze. Zhang Boyan immediately used telepathy to say a few words. A frightening light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes. He first took a few steps, then pointed to a bell pavilion not far away and said, "Younger martial brother Zhao, go and ring that bronze bell." Zhao Gu was stunned for a moment, then immediately replied, "Yes." He bowed and went to the bell pavilion. There was a bronze bell placed there that was as tall as 2 people. He stepped forward and pushed the long wood. Not long after, the distant sound of the bell could be heard throughout the mountain. When this bell was rung, it meant that the headmaster of the house was summoning the disciples. As long as the disciples heard the news, they must come to the main hall within a quarter of an hour. If there was any delay, they would be punished according to the rules of the house. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Younger martial brother, I will go out for a while." Zhao Gu was puzzled and asked, "Isn't the headmaster summoning the disciples? Where are you going?" Zhang Yan nonchalantly said, "I heard that a disciple of Hanyuan school who betrayed the school is in Emshan sect. Wait for me to retrieve this person's head. It won't be too late to meet the disciples then." Chapter 635. After returning from Vermilion Peak, Gao Zhongyuan went to Jade Gown Peak to see his master, Wang Guangyuan. Although Jade Gown Peak was under the control of the Mount Amei sect, it was still 50 li away from the main gate. However, because of its beautiful scenery and many magnificent palaces, it was often used to entertain guests. After Gao Zhongyuan had his token examined by the disciple guarding the mountain, he went straight to the brightly lit palace on the mountain peak. Before he arrived, he heard the sound of decadent dance music and couldn't help but curl the corner of his mouth. Not long after, he arrived at the door of the palace. After stepping inside, he saw his master sitting on a couch, surrounded by several beautiful maids in colorful clothes. They were drinking wine and making merry. He looked like a wanton debauchee. He looked like a Taoist cultivator. There was a hint of disdain in the depths of his eyes. He didn't step forward to greet them. Instead, he minded his own business and sat down at a nearby table. He picked up a jade pot and poured himself a drink. Wang Guangyuan squinted his eyes and suddenly laughed. He patted one of the maid's round buttocks and said, "Go, give my disciple a toast." The woman giggled and said in a sweet voice, "Yes." Her soft body moved slightly. Before she reached him, a fragrant wind assaulted him. Gao Zhongyuan's expression turned cold. He said with disgust, "Stay away from me." He waved his sleeve, creating a gust of wind that threw the woman to the ground. Gao Zhongyuan didn't get angry at his behavior. He laughed and said, "Disciple, do you not like this woman?" "That's true. In a remote place like Yong Mountain Sect, there are only ordinary women. I'm afraid they won't enter your eyes." Finished speaking, he lightly waved his hand. The candles in the hall flickered. The woman didn't even have time to cry out in alarm before there was a sudden sound. She was swept out of the hall and thrown off the mountain peak. Then, as if nothing had happened, he picked up a cup and said to the woman next to him, "Fill it up." In Chu, he often feasted and made merry. It was inevitable that he would be infected with the habits of the secular world's nobles. He didn't care about human life in the slightest. When the other women in the hall saw this, they were so frightened that their beautiful faces paled. The woman pouring wine was even more unbearable. Her hands trembled and a lot of the wine spilled outside. She almost collapsed to the ground. Fortunately, Gao Zhongyuan didn't care much about this. Gao Zhongyuan coughed and said, "Master, your disciple has just returned from Tsangzhu Peak." Wang Guangyuan said casually, "What do you think?" Gao Zhongyuan looked to his left and right. Wang Guangyuan frowned. "Scram all of you." The maids on both sides felt as if they had been pardoned. He hurriedly ran out of the hall. Gao Zhongyuan waited until only the master and disciple were left. Only then did he say, "I was the one who found Chu Mu Rant's concubine, Exen Yang. Now that I have something on him, of course he will listen to me. I stole that magic treasure." Then, he shook his head and said in a rather regretful tone, "It's a pity that it's not Chu Muran who's in charge. Otherwise, with teacher's letter, with his weak character, he would definitely submit." Now that it's Taoist Zhang, things won't be so smooth. Wang Guangyuan didn't mind. That's fine, he said. When your martial Uncle Chu arrives tomorrow, we'll fight our way to Han Yuan's mountain gate. Let's see if he's stubborn then. He had set his sights on the entire celestial city and had long seen it as something in his pocket. How could a little bit of money satisfy his appetite? Even if Han Yuan's sect was really respectful, he would still find a way to stir up trouble. This time, with senior brother Chu Changji's promise to help, he was very confident and didn't think that anyone could stop him. Gao Zhongyuan nodded and said, with martial uncle's help, it's in the bag. Wang Guangyuan said proudly, that Taoist Zhang has also helped me greatly. If Yong Fu was still in charge of the celestial city, it wouldn't be good for me to act so directly. Now, it's perfectly justifiable. When I become the lord of this celestial city, I can avoid the fight between the two sects and wait for the right time to act. He came to seize the immortal city this time. On the surface, it was to take revenge for the enmity of the past, but in reality, there was another reason behind it. Zhongtai sect and Xianyu sect had fought a few times previously and both sides suffered heavy casualties. The conflict had reached a point where it couldn't be resolved. Now, Zhongtai sect was recruiting disciples everywhere. Because Wang Guangyuan's Taoist companion was also a disciple of the sect, if he was still in Chu, he would most likely be involved. Therefore, after much consideration, he decided to temporarily hide in the Shenwu mountain, far away from the land of dispute. Once he had the protection of the celestial city's prohibition, and with his identity as a Yuanying Jinren, Zhongtai sect wouldn't do anything to him. When the time comes, he could just send a few more offerings and he would be able to erase the negative impact of this matter. At this moment, Gao Zhongyuan said, after we take down Songzhu Peak tomorrow, Master, please hand over Chu Mu Ran and Wenliang to me to deal with. When he was cultivating in the sect, he had already reached the step of dissolving medicine and condensing the pill. However, Taoist Chu took the spirit shell that was supposed to be used to buy the external medicine for condensing the pill for him. He was very dissatisfied with this and thought that Taoist one was behind this. Gao Zhongyuan was very vengeful, but he thought that both of them deserved to die. Wang Guangyan smiled and said, that's easy. After we take down the Han Yuan sect, how about you become the sect leader? Gao Zhongyuan said with disdain, it's just a small place like the Han Yuan sect, how can it accommodate me? Wang Guangyan clapped his hands and laughed, good. Wang Guangyuan's disciple should have this kind of arrogance. Just as the two of them were talking, Zhang Yan had also arrived in the sky above Jade Pao Peak. Originally, he followed Gao Zhongyuan's breath and came here. He wanted to barge in from the main gate and directly capture Gao Zhongyuan. However, after circling around, he found that the prohibition here was simple and not very strong. After thinking for a while, he decided to use his mana to forcefully break it open. At the same time, he could also intimidate the sects in the Shenwu mountain. With a leap, he entered the sky and sat down, moving his technique. Without any hesitation, his robes fluttered, and the surrounding spiritual chi swirled in the sky under his control, gathering continuously. The golden hand above his head gradually condensed into a shape, and under the support of his mana, it spread wider and wider, until it had the power to support the clouds in the sky. However, after a while, this spiritual vigor could no longer be suppressed, and the mountains within a radius of 10 miles were also shaking. At this moment, Wang Guangyuan suddenly felt something, and his expression turned cold, saying, this is... He shook his robes and flew out of the main hall. Looking up into the sky, he saw a tall and handsome Taoist standing in the sky, and the sky within a radius of 100 miles was covered by misty smoke. In the middle of it, there was a huge hand that was thousands of feet long, and its whole body was condensed from yellow smoke. The 5 fingers were complete, and the lines of the palm could be seen clearly. It was enough to show that the mana of the person who used it was vigorous. Gao Zhongyuan came out a step later, and he also saw this shocking scene, and his face turned pale. At this moment, Wang Guangyuan was standing on the top of the mountain, and he could faintly feel the huge pressure coming from the sky. One could imagine how terrifying the mana contained in it was. His face twitched, and he cupped his hands towards the sky, saying, "May I know which Taoist friend has arrived? Please come down and have a chat." Zhang Yan didn't pay any attention to him. At this moment, his mana had already been accumulated to the limit. With a thought, the enormous hand that could hold up the sky flipped downwards. In an instant, a vast amount of mana poured down, and it seemed as if it wanted to crush everything in this place. Wang Guangyuan's expression changed abruptly, and he shouted, "Not good!" He grabbed Gao Zhongyuan and flew out of the mountain with a strong wind. He had only flown 5 or 6 miles away in a panic, and the giant hand had already fallen from the sky. With a rumble, it slapped on the top of the mountain, and the surroundings were shaken. Not only did it disperse the prohibition on the Jade Gown Peak, but it also destroyed the temples and buildings on the peak, and even the peak was reduced by half. The movement here was so big that it also alarmed the various sects in the Divine House Mountain, and they all flew out of the mountain on flying lights. However, for fear of getting into trouble, they did not dare to approach, and only watched from afar. When they saw the giant hand, their faces all changed. Yong Fu also came out of the mountain, and his expression was solemn as he looked at the distant sky. When the black and yellow hand waved, the mana shook the mountains, and even he could feel it. He could not help but feel a chill in his heart, and he thought to himself, what kind of expert came to the mountain, and how can there be such a sound when fighting? At this moment, the eldest disciple by Jing came up from behind and said, "Master, it's in the direction of the Jade Gown Peak." Yong Fu frowned and thought for a moment, and suddenly came to a realization. He stamped his feet and said, "Oh no!" He leaped forward, and immediately turned into a light rainbow, rushing in that direction. Wang Guangyuan saw the devastation below, and even the appearance of the mountain had changed. Such power made him tremble with fear. Until now, he still had not figured out who he had offended, and he shouted, "Fellow Taoist, I am Wang Guangyuan, and I have no enmity with you in the past, and no grievances between us. Why do you—" Before he finished speaking, he saw that the giant hand lifted again, wrapped in a huge pressure, and swept towards the two of them. How would he dare to take this kind of divine Taoist technique head-on? He quickly shut his mouth and dodged to the side. Fortunately, this giant hand moved very slowly, and although he was in a sorry state, he was not hit. He felt that he was powerless to fight against this person, and wanted to leave. Just as he was thinking whether he should say a few harsh words, he saw that the 5 fingers below him were slowly closing, as if to grasp him in the palm. This shocked him to the point that his soul almost left his body, and he did not have time to say anything more. He looked up to the sky and fled. Zhang Yan expressionlessly waved his sleeve, and over 10 drops of serene heavy water flew out and blocked his path. If he did not dodge, he would definitely be hit. Wang Guangyuan also caught a glimpse of the serene heavy water, and saw that it was not very eye-catching, and it came from a few miles away. Even if it was originally very powerful, when he thought about it, it must have been greatly weakened, and this move should only be used to block him. So he snorted, and did not change his original path. He opened up the treasure light that protected his body, and with Gao Zhongyuan under his arm, he rushed forward without the slightest hesitation. In just a blink of an eye, he collided with the 10 drops of serene heavy water. A loud sound was heard in midair, and the treasure light had already cracked, and he fell from the sky. Zhang Yan sneered, and with a wave of his hand, he pulled Gao Zhongyuan, who had also fallen from the clouds, to his front, and threw him at his feet, and said indifferently, "Gao Zhongyuan, you have rebelled against the sect. Follow me back to accept the sect's punishment." Gao Zhongyuan had never seen Zhang Yan before, and now that he heard those words, how could he not know who was standing in front of him? His body trembled, and he howled, "It's Priest Zhang, it's Priest Zhang, teacher save me. Teacher save me." Although a few of Wang Guangyuan's bones and tendons were broken, and his internal organs were also shaken to the point of dislocation, but because Zhang Yan did not make a killing move, he managed to stop the strong wind after falling for several feet and clamored, "If you dare to harm my disciple's life, my Hui Xian old ancestor sect will definitely not let you go." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "You took in a disciple who betrayed my sect as your disciple, and this was unreasonable first. Today I am only giving you a light punishment. If you are not convinced, feel free to gather your men, and come to Han Yuan's sect to look for me." After speaking, he flicked his sleeve and floated towards the clouds. Chapter 636. P.S. My neck has been sprained these past 2 days, so I've been writing much slower. On Tsangju Peak, Chu Mu Ran and Daoist Wen's hearts shook when they heard the bell ringing outside. Wang Guangyuan's letter had just been sent up the mountain, but the sect was summoning its disciples at this time. There was something unusual about this. The two didn't care about anything else and flew out of their caves. One rode on a smoke and flew up the mountain. In a flash they arrived at the great hall halfway up the mountain and landed on the empty ground in front of the hall. Priest Wen hurriedly strode in and saw Zhao Gu sitting alone in the hall. He was surprised and shouted to him, "Shidi, do you know why the bell was rung? Did something happen in the sect?" Chu Mu Ran also came in. He looked at Zhao Gu nervously, afraid that he would hear some bad news. Zhao Gu stood up and bowed. "I was the one who rung the bell." Daoist Wen was stunned. His eyes lit up and he muttered to himself, "Could it be that the manor head is summoning us to fight Wang Guangying?" Zhao Gu shook his head. "I only know the manor head's orders. I don't know anything else." Chu Mu Ran suddenly felt uneasy and scolded, "Junior martial brother, don't talk nonsense. What's the point of us going up to fight the Yuanian cultivators?" He took a step forward and asked, "Junior martial brother Zhao, where is the manor head now?" Zhao Gu answered honestly, "The manor head has left the mountain just now." Chu Mu Ran was surprised. If he was summoning the disciples, why did he leave the sect? At this time, there was a commotion outside the hall. The disciples at the foot of the mountain heard the bell and came up the mountain as well. There used to be only 30 disciples in the Deep Cave sect, but now there were more than 200. Because they were new and uncertain, they were all trying to find out what the gathering was about. Chu Mu Ran walked out of the hall. He looked over and saw a beautiful female disciple standing in the hall. She was the only mystic light realm female disciple in the sect, Jiang Ro. He waved his hand at her and said, "Martial niece Jiang, come here." Jiang Ro bowed and said generously, "Martial uncle, do you have any orders?" Chu Mu Ran said, "Where's your eldest senior martial brother? Where is he?" Jiang Ro said, "Today is eldest senior brother's turn to guard the mountain gate. I can't get away." Chu Muran suddenly understood. Unless it was absolutely necessary, the disciples on duty at the mountain gate were not allowed to leave without permission. He thought for a while and said, "Go and replace him." Daoist Wen also walked out at this moment. "Senior brother, what do you mean by this? Could it be that only your disciple is a disciple of the sect and my disciple isn't?" Chu Muran smiled bitterly and said, "Junior martial brother, I don't have any other intentions." As the eldest disciple of the sect, Xian Chao will discuss the matter later. "I have to be there." Daoist Wen scoffed and said in a stiff tone, "Whether to summon him or not, the manor head will decide. What are you worrying about?" Chu Mulan knew that he was still brooding over what had happened just now. He sighed and said to Jiang Ro, "It's very noisy down there. It's not proper. Go and discipline them." Jiang Ro looked at her master. The latter cursed, "What are you looking at me for? Didn't you hear what your martial uncle said?" Jiang Ro was used to being scolded by Daoist Wen, so she was not afraid. With a calm expression, she bowed to the two again and turned to leave. Although her name had the word Ro in it, she was a forthright person, even more so than some men. Moreover, she had some tricks up her sleeve and her cultivation level was the highest here. Not long after she left, the disciples calmed down and stood in front of the hall. No one dared to make a ruckus anymore. Not too long after, a strong wind suddenly howled in the sky, clouds swirled, and a dazzling ray of light headed straight for the peak. Zhao Gu walked out from the hall, raised his head and said, "The manor head has returned." Chu Muran said loudly, "Disciples, why aren't you greeting the manor head?" More than 200 disciples were awed by the shocking scene when the ray of light flew over. Their hearts were filled with reverence. As soon as he finished speaking, they all knelt on the ground. The ray of light landed in front of the hall. Everyone felt a slight tremor under their feet. Some of the new disciples gathered their courage and looked up secretly. they saw a handsome young Taoist standing there. He was wearing a black robe with big sleeves. His eyes were like lightning and seemed to be emitting divine light. There seemed to be waves of spiritual qi rolling around him. It was a daunting sight. Zhang Yan only took a few minutes to come and go. He glanced at the people in the hall and said, "Are all the disciples here?" Zhao Gu came up and bowed. "Manor head, other than the disciple on duty at the mountain gate, Lin Xianchao, all the 267 disciples are here." Zhang Yan nodded and shook his sleeves. Suddenly, the sound of the tide was heard. Everyone was dazed. At this moment, it seemed like a huge wave had swept over the mountain. Then, they saw a person thrown on the empty ground in front of the hall. He looked dispirited and weak. Chu Muran was shocked when he saw him. "Gao Zhongyuan?" He looked up at Zhang Yan and said, "Manor head, this is..." Zhang Yan said in a deep voice, "I heard that he appeared at the foot of the mountain. So, I went to catch him myself." Taoist Wen looked at Gao Zhongyuan coldly. He scoffed and stood up. He cupped his hands and said, "Manor head, Gao Zhongyuan stole the tree and left the mountain without permission. This is not tolerated by the rules of the sect. Sect leader, please issue a decree to behead him as a warning to others." Gao Zhongyuan was startled. He looked around and saw Chu Muran standing at the side. As if he was grasping at a life-saving straw, he said anxiously, Senior Brother Chu, please save me for the sake of our past relationship." He was personally guided up the mountain by Chu Muran and was often treated like a nephew. Hearing his plea, Chu Muran couldn't help but feel sorry for him. He also stood up and cupped his hands. "Manor head, although Gao Zhongyuan was wrong in stealing the tree, he has been cultivating in the sect for many years. He has never done anything to harm his fellow disciples. His crime is not worthy of death." Zhang Yan looked at him and said lightly, "Junior Brother Chu, do you know that after Gao Zhongyuan broke out of the sect, he became Wang Guangyuan's disciple?" Chu Muran was shocked. He looked at Gao Zhongyuan as if he couldn't believe it. Then, a sour expression appeared on his face. He shook his head and sighed. "You can go against the evils of heaven, but you can't escape the evils of your own actions. According to the rules of the Qinsong school, if a disciple broke out of the sect, his crime was not worthy of death. At most, he would be arrested and imprisoned. However, if he secretly joined another sect, he would be betraying his master and ancestors. No matter what, he would not be able to escape death." Priest Wen, on the other hand, was burning with anger. He said to Chu Muran, "Senior Brother Chu, is this the good disciple you found for our master?" Chu Muran lowered his head and said nothing. Gao Zhongyuan was shocked when he heard this. Seeing that Priest Chu couldn't save him, he gritted his teeth, turned around, and knelt down. He kowtowed repeatedly and didn't stop even when the blood on his forehead splattered. He said loudly, "Sect Master, I was muddle-headed and made a big mistake. That old bastard Wang Guangyuan actually came here with another purpose. I know the inside story, and I also know the old bastard's background. If Sect Master can spare my life, I am willing to atone for my crimes and tell everything." Zhao Gu didn't say anything until now, but he suddenly said, "When you left, you were only at the Mystic Light realm, but now you are already at the Core Formation realm. It should be Wang Guangyuan who helped you form your core, so he should be doing you a favor. How can you say something like this?" Gao Zhongyuan's expression froze, but he didn't know what to say. Priest Wen cupped his hands at Zhang Yan and said, "Gao Zhongyuan betrayed his master and ancestors. Sect Master, please allow me to kill this bastard to uphold the rules of the sect." Zhang Yan said, "Junior Martial Brother Wen, how should he be punished according to the rules of the sect?" Priest Wen said loudly, "He should be beheaded with a stone axe, and his soul should be nailed into a wind cave. He should be tortured by wind for 100 days. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "If that's the case, Junior Martial Brother can execute the punishment for me." Gao Zhongyuan's expression changed drastically. He took 2 steps back and looked around. He seemed to know that he couldn't escape death, so he shouted crazily, "My master Wang Guangyuan, my martial uncle Chu Changji is from Hui Xian ancestors faction. If you kill me today, you will be buried with me in the future." Once he said this, Priest Chu's expression changed drastically. Priest Wen, however, sneered and said, "No matter how powerful they can't protect you now." He waved his sleeves and a thick stone axe appeared in the smoke. It hung in the air, and he made a hand sign. The axe fell down with a hum, and it fiercely chopped down on Gao Zhongyuan's head. With a bang, the top of Gao Zhongyuan's head was shattered, and he fell to the ground dead. Priest Chu's mouth opened. He wanted to say something, but in the end he didn't. Priest Wen raised his hand again and pulled that strand of primordial spirit over. He took out a talisman from his sleeves and slapped it on it. He then bowed to Zhang Yan, leaped up and flew towards the main hall. He went all the way to the rear hall. There was a big well here, covered with a greenish-gray thick stone slab, and on top of it were hundreds of thick iron chains. He silently recited the incantation, and with a sound, the iron chains unraveled by themselves. He then released a stream of evil smoke and lifted the stone slab to one side, revealing a bottomless hole. From afar, one could feel a cold wind coming from inside. The coldness penetrated into one's flesh and bones, as if a knife was slicing one's skin. This was the evil yin energy of the mountain. To cultivators, it was no less than a fierce poison. Shen Baishuang used her power to suppress it here, to prevent her disciples from being harmed by it, but it could also be used as a punishment. Priest Wen used his mana to protect his body, and walked to the mouth of the well. He took out a spiritual nail, and poked it into Gao Zhongyuan's primordial spirit, and threw it down. He then covered the stone slab, and used the incantation to seal the iron chains. After he was done, he checked again, and seeing that there were no mistakes, he returned to the front of the hall and said, "Master, junior brother has thrown the disciple who betrayed his master into the wind hole. After 100 days, his soul will scatter, and he will no longer exist in this world." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Thank you, junior brother." Priest Wen turned around and said loudly to the 200 disciples below, "This is the fate of those who betray their master. All disciples must bear this in mind." The disciples below were shocked. Not only did Gao Zhongyuan's head was struck by the stone axe, he also had to suffer the pain of 100 days of torture, without a physical body, and when the evil wind blew, it was as if thousands of ants were biting his body. The pain was indescribable, and yet he had the protection of the talisman, and would not die immediately. Such a scene, just thinking about it made one shudder. Chu Mu ran sighed inwardly. Today, Zhang Yan had killed Gao Zhongyuan in front of all the disciples of the sect. From this moment on, there was no longer any leeway between the Deep Abyss sect and Wang Guangyuan. There was no turning back even if they wanted to. But the worry in his heart was another matter, not to mention the matter of Zhongtai School, just that Hui Xian Elder was not a simple person. If he was angered, how would Deep Abyss School defend against him? Chapter 637. Wang Guangyuan had been severely injured by Zhang Yan and had to recuperate for an entire night before recovering his strength. On the second day, his senior apprentice brother Chu Changji arrived. Yong Fu had heard of this person for a long time. Although he was the head of a sect, he didn't dare to put on airs and personally went out to welcome him. Unexpectedly, Chu Changji had a scholarly appearance and a neat beard. He looked like a teacher and spoke in a humble and courteous manner. He wasn't as violent and aggressive as the rumors made him out to be. If Wang Guangyuan hadn't been by his side, he would have thought that he had mistaken him for someone else. After exchanging some pleasantries, Yong Fu said, "I heard that Taoist Chu has come all the way from the southern frontier. I've prepared a banquet to welcome Taoist Chu." Chu Changji replied, "It is already presumptuous of me to come without notice. How would I dare to disturb Sect Master Yong? I think we should forget about it." Yong Fu thought that Chu Changji was just being polite and tried his best to invite him, but Chu Changji repeatedly declined. After a few tries, Yong Fu confirmed that Chu Changji had no such intentions and finally gave up. He said, "Although my Shenwu mountain is located in the north of the eastern frontier and is considered a desolate place by the cultivators of the continent, the land is vast and there are many wonderful scenic spots. If Taoist Chu is interested, I can personally accompany you another day and have a good tour." Wang Guangyuan, on the other hand, was a bit impatient. He said, Taoist Yong, my senior apprentice brother has traveled hundreds of thousands of li to get here. He must be tired. If there's anything, why don't we talk about it tomorrow? Yong Fu laughed and said, That's my fault. I've already prepared a quiet courtyard for Taoist Chu. It's a simple and shabby room. I hope Taoist Chu doesn't mind. Chu Changji exchanged a few polite words. Before he left, he suddenly turned around and asked, I heard that Taoist Chu once fought with Taoist Yang. Can you tell me the specifics? Yong Fu was startled and slightly embarrassed. He said, I'm ashamed. We didn't really fight that day. I know very little about him. Chu Changji could tell that he didn't want to continue on this topic. He smiled and didn't pursue the matter any further. He was led by a Taoist boy to the side courtyard that had been prepared beforehand. When they reached the place and settled down, Wang Guangyun hurriedly sent the Taoist boy away and said impatiently, Senior brother, you have to help me. Not only did Taoist Zhang injure me, he even captured my new disciple and chopped him to death with a stone axe. Chu Changji came to the jade couch and sat down cross-legged. What kind of divine arts and techniques did that Taoist Zhang use when he fought with you? Don't leave anything out. Tell me everything. Yesterday, Wang Guangyuan had been beaten by Zhang Yan to the point where he didn't have the slightest strength to resist. Speaking of it, it was extremely embarrassing. Originally, he wanted to stick gold on his own face, but under Chu Changji's gaze, he didn't know why, but he didn't dare to hide anything and honestly recounted what happened that day. Chu Changji asked a few more things that he didn't pay attention to, even the minor details. Then, he sat there and closed his eyes in deep thought. He didn't come here just to support Wang Guangyuan. Now that the Zhongtai and Xianyu sects were fighting, the south was a place of trouble. Although he liked to fight, he could still judge the situation and wouldn't blindly get involved. It was a good opportunity to avoid it, and this way, his reputation wouldn't be damaged. Moreover, a celestial city was quite attractive to him, and it was worth it for him to make a move. If he could completely control it, he would have a foundation in the future. But from Wang Guangyuan's words, Taoist Zhang wasn't as easy to deal with as he thought. Wang Guangyuan asked carefully, Senior brother, with your cultivation, do you still fear that Taoist Zhang? Chu Changji opened his eyes and looked at him, saying, Before a battle, it's necessary to understand the enemy's strength. This is like looking at a person to cure a disease. You need to prescribe the right medicine, and it's not advisable to be rash. Wang Guangyuan's spirit rose slightly and he said, Then senior brother, did you see anything? Chu Changji didn't hide anything, saying, I still can't see through this person, I need to think about it at length. Wang Guangyuan heard from Chu Changji that Chu Changji didn't seem to have any intention of making a move immediately, and he couldn't help but feel anxious, saying, Senior brother, he had borrowed the name of the Zhongtai sect to come here. This was originally an extremely good banner, but he himself had been heavily injured by Zhang Yan, and even his newly accepted disciple had been executed. Such extraordinary humiliation. If he didn't immediately retaliate and just endured it, anyone would be able to see that there was something wrong. At that time, who would take him seriously? Chu Changji shook his head and smiled, saying, Junior brother, don't be anxious, I already have an idea, and I will definitely seek justice for you. It's just that the time isn't right now, and it's not convenient for me to say it out loud. Go back first, I still have homework to do today. Wang Guangyuan could only give up, and he left resentfully. After Zhang Yan dealt with Gao Zhongyun, he meditated as usual, refining Jun Yang's spiritual essence, and paid no attention to the outside world. Many of the rare medicinal ingredients needed to refine by Yuangshi had to be obtained as soon as possible, but the Deep Abyss sect couldn't leave him for a moment, so he ordered Zhang Boyan to bring the Black Heart Mountain Immortal City token to other immortal cities to purchase them. Chu Mu Ran was on tenterhooks for several days, but he did not see any signs of activity. Only after he sent someone out to inquire did he find out that Chu Changji had already gone to stay at Mount E sect. However, for some unknown reason, there had been no signs of activity until now. The new disciples of the Deep Abyss sect were mostly from the noble families of Mount Shinwu, so the news of Chu Changji's arrival couldn't be hidden from them. This person had a great reputation, and it seemed that behind him stood Zhongtai sect, so all the sects were anxious. If it was in the past, they might have already called back the disciples they had sent to the Deep Abyss sect, but because Zhang Yan decisively dealt with Gao Zhongyuan, everyone in the sect was intimidated on the spot, so no one dared to make a move. Initially, they thought that Chu Changji would come to them to denounce them, but after dozens of days, the Mount Xinwu remained calm. On this day, Wang Guangyuan couldn't wait any longer, so he ran into the cave and said, "Senior Marshal Brother, if you still don't make a move, I'm afraid no one will take you seriously." Chu Changji, however, was very confident and smiled. "Junior Marshal Brother, you're still too impatient." Wang Guangyuan grumbled, "How can I not be anxious?" "Senior Marshal Brother, what are you planning to do? Can you tell me a little so that I can have an idea?" Chu Changji pondered for a while, then nodded and said, "It's not difficult to fight with that Taoist Zhang, it's just a letter of challenge. But have you ever thought about what if I'm not his match?" Wang Guangyuan was stunned for a moment, then he reacted and said in disbelief, "How can that be? With Senior Marshal Brother's ability, how can you lose to that Taoist Zhang?" Chu Changji glanced at him and said somewhat exasperatedly, "Junior Marshal Brother, to say that you're a frog in a well looking at the sky is an understatement. The world is so big and there are so many capable experts. Let's not talk about Taoist Zhang's background, but have you found out his name? As a fellow Yuanian cultivator, you don't know which sect he's from, nor do you know the treasures and techniques he uses, so how can you say that you can win?" Wang Guangyuan lowered his head and probed, "Then Senior Marshal Brother, what do you mean?" Chu Changji said expressionlessly, "If one person can't beat him, then two people. If two people can't beat him, then three people. I don't believe that we can still take care of this person if we contact 3 to 5 other Taoists." Wang Guangyuan was stunned. He said in confusion, "If we want to decide who the celestial city belongs to, we have to summon the heads of all the sects in the Mount Xinwu to attend the ceremony. How can we attack him under the watchful eyes of so many people?" Chu Changji scolded him, "I think you've been hanging out with those nobles for too long that your brain has become dull. Can't you think of a way to lure him out?" At this moment, a servant boy walked in and said, "Master, the guests from the north are here." Chu Changji's eyes lit up. He stood up and said, "Invite them in." He then turned his head and said to Wang Guangyuan with a smile, "Junior Marshal Brother, the bait is here." Not long after, 2 young cultivators in brown robes, one tall and one short, walked in. They were both core formation cultivators, but there was a faint demonic aura around them. Obviously, they were demon cultivators. The corner of Wang Guangyuan's eyes twitched. He immediately thought of the demon tribe that was currently entrenched in the Beimasi realm. When the person in front saw Chu Changji, he came up and bowed, saying, "Is this spiritual Master Chu? I am Luo Sun, and this is my clan brother, Luo Yi. We are here on the orders of Third Uncle." Chu Changji did not look down on them just because they were only core formation cultivators. He invited them to sit down and asked, "What message does fellow Taoist Luo have for me?" Luo Sun cupped his hands and went straight to the point. "My uncle wants to ask, Spiritual Master, does the letter from before still count?" Chu Changji's expression turned serious and he nodded. "Of course. As long as I take control of the Divine House Immortal City, everything that your tribe needs will be provided." Luo Sun took half a step forward and looked up with a sharp gaze. "Spiritual Master Chu, do you dare to make an oath?" Wang Guangyuan jumped up and cursed, "Bastard, who do you think you are? How dare you force my senior marshal brother to make an oath?" Chu Changji, however, waved his hand and gestured for Wang Guangyuan to leave. He said indifferently, "It's easy for me to make an oath, but forgive me for being blunt, the 2 of you are not enough." Luo Sun cupped his hands and said, "We brothers are not people who don't know what's good for us. At this moment, we have brought Third Uncle's oath with us. As long as Spiritual Master Chu is willing to make the oath, we will immediately hand it over with both hands." Chu Changji was slightly surprised, but he only thought for a moment before saying, "Bring it over." Luo Sun did not hesitate and took out a golden box from his sleeve. Immediately, a Taoist boy came over to receive it and place it on the table. Spiritual Master Chu opened the golden box and took out an oath. After looking through it, he frowned and forced out a drop of blood essence from the tip of his finger. He pressed it down heavily, picked it up, and tossed it to Luo Sun. "Take it." After Luo Sun took it, he did not look at it too much and put it away in his bag with ease. If this item was up to no good, he would be able to see through it once he returned. Thus, he was very relieved. Now that both sides had the oath, they could be considered as half-allies. Thus, his attitude changed immediately, and a smile appeared on his face. He was not as cold as he was just now. Although the Python tribe had occupied the Baima Ocean domain and conquered an immortal city, that place was already empty. There was nothing left. Moreover, without the immortal city token that was recognized by the 5 major sects, it was impossible to purchase the cultivation items of the major sections. After all, there were countless disciples cultivating in the tribe, and the daily consumption was not a small amount. It was best that someone was willing to take the initiative to ally with them. Before he left, he asked again, "Spiritual Master Chu, the sects of the Dongsheng continent are currently hostile towards my tribe. If you ally with my tribe, how will you explain to the 5 major sects?" Chu Changji smiled deeply and said, "That is my tribe's matter. Your tribe does not need to know." With his hundreds of years of connections, it could be said to be a piece of cake for him to do this. Moreover, his teacher, Elder Hui Xian, and the sect leader of the Zhongtai sect were brothers-in-law. With this layer of relationship, who could do anything to him? Chapter 638. There was a stack of letters on Zhang Yan's desk. After flipping through a few of them, his expression turned solemn. For the past month, Chu Changji had been well-behaved and didn't make any moves. However, the kingdoms in the Divine House Mountain were suddenly attacked by demons from the sea. Because most sects in Dongsheng continent didn't care about formations, a few of them even had their mountain gates broken. After reading all the letters, he asked Chu, Wen, and Zhaoge, "Junior brothers, how much do you know about the demon tribes in the Baima Ocean world?" Chu Muran and Daoist Wen shook their heads. Zhaoge thought for a moment, then stood up and said in a deep voice, "I know a little about this matter. This demon tribe came from the outer seas 100 years ago and drove away the celestial Civ sect that was originally here. I heard that in these years, they have been conquering the various tribes of the outer seas. Under their rule, they have already conquered 173 countries. They are extremely powerful, but they have never come to the Dongsheng continent before, so the 5 great sects have turned a blind eye to them. I don't know the reason this time." Chu Muran said, "Master, the sect masters are all outside the mountain gate. I beg you to open the gate and let them in to avoid trouble." Daoist Wen disagreed, "I don't think so. Who knows if there are spies among the sects? Why don't you order them to hide in the mountain first and come back after the storm blows over?" Chu Muran said anxiously, No. As the person in charge of the city, if senior brother doesn't do anything, the people will lose faith." Daoist Wen said sarcastically, "Senior brother, have you forgotten how those people treated us that day? Why are you so polite to them?" Chu Muran shook his head, "Junior brother, you don't know. A few days ago, Chu Changji said that if senior brother can't protect the sects in the mountain, you can ask for his help. He won't refuse." Daoist Wen was stunned and said angrily, "I think he must be behind this." Chu Muran didn't agree. Chu Changji is the first disciple of Hui Xian Patriarch. Why would he collude with the demon cultivators? That's ridiculous. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Not necessarily. Even if we take down those small sects, what can we take? The only place worth plundering in the Divine House Mountain was the Black Heart Immortal City. Those demons had occupied the North Sea for more than 100 years, so how could they not know? Therefore, there must be another reason behind this." Both Wen and Zhao nodded. Ever since Chu Changji's arrival, they had yet to make a move. It just so happened that this matter had happened not long after he arrived here. They didn't believe that there was no connection between the two. At this moment, a Taoist boy came in from outside the door and said, "Sect leader Reverend. Sect Master Yong of the Mount E sect is here to pay a visit." Zhang Yan smiled and said, since junior brother one can see that it's a trap, then it must be. However, as the headmaster of the immortal city, unless I give up my position, I have no choice but to go. After he took control of the immortal city, although the Deep Abyss School could benefit from it, it also had the responsibility to protect the city. The person who set up the trap clearly saw this point. Chu Mu Ran looked worried and suggested, Senior brother, can we slow down a bit and call Jinren back first? The two of them can go together. That way, we'll have a higher chance of success. Zhang Yan smiled and waved his sleeves, saying, no need. It's just a small matter. I'll be back soon. Junior brothers, just guard the sect well. As soon as he finished speaking, the three heard a rumble in their ears. They saw a shocking rainbow fly out from the top floor of the hall, straight into the clouds, and disappear without a trace. 30 miles away from the sea at the northern foot of Mount Shenwu, there were dozens of floating boats that were more than 300 feet long floating on the sea. They were connected by iron chains and golden rings. More than 1,000 strong men were constantly pouring baskets of brown mud into the boats. When the boats were full, they would cut off the chains and let them sink to the bottom of the sea. Wang Guangyuan felt his heart ache when he saw this. He grumbled, these are all high-quality jade mud. It's just for show. Why waste it like this? This jade paste was made by grinding spirit shells into powder, then mixing it into a refined paste. Cultivators could use it to fill up the sea and build islands. If they had a treasure that could gather spiritual energy, they could form spirit veins after a long time. Chu Changji didn't mind and said, if we don't make it more realistic, how can we force that Taoist Zhang to come here? You don't have to be so calculative. It's only about 100,000 spirit shells. Consider it as me owing you one. After we take over the immortal city, I'll make it up to you. At this moment, a light rainbow flew over from the sky. Wang Guangyun glanced outside the window and said in a low voice, Senior brother, it's that Taoist Zhang. The streak of light descended onto the ship, and a cultivator with disheveled hair and a short-sleeved green robe walked out. He carried a bamboo basket on his back. He was none other than the Taoist surnamed Jiang who fought against Zhang Boyan in Constellation Valley. After he steadied himself, he looked around vigilantly. Then, he went to the largest boat, lifted the jade curtain, and entered the cabin. Stepping into the inner room, he raised his head and saw Chu Changji and Wang Guangyuan sitting in the inner room. His originally tense expression relaxed as he cupped his fists and said in a deep voice, Greetings to the two of you. After I received the letter, I immediately rushed over. I hope I'm not too late. Chu Changji chuckled and stood up to return the greeting. Then he took Taoist Zhang's hand and said with a sigh, It's not too late. After I sent the letter, I thought that a person like Taoist Zhang might not be able to invite you. Taoist Zhang was instantly flattered. Chu Changji had a great reputation in Dongsheng continent. Not only was he a second-layer Yuanine cultivator, he was also the head disciple of Hui Xian Patriarch. He wasn't someone an itinerant cultivator like Taoist Jiang could compare to. Yet, Taoist Jiang was being so polite to him. It was obvious that Taoist Jiang thought highly of him. Taoist Jiang hurriedly said, I don't dare. Since spiritual master Chu has summoned me, how could I not come? Wang Guangyuan didn't stand up and looked at Taoist Jiang with a hint of disdain. After the two of them sat down in the cabin, Taoist Jiang said in a low voice, Do you know who I saw a few days ago? Chu Changji said, Could it be related to that Taoist Jiang? Taoist Jiang nodded and said, That's right. That day, I saw a magic treasure in a celestial city in Chu country. At that time, I didn't have enough spirit shells, so I went to borrow it from a friend I was on good terms with. However, I happened to see Taoist Jiang, who I fought with that day. I asked around and found out that he went southeast. Chu Changji and Wang Guangyuan looked at each other and raised their voices slightly. He said, In that case, we only need to deal with that Taoist Jiang? Taoist Jiang confirmed, I think so. Chu Changji's eyes flickered. He said, This is good news. My original plan was to deal with the two of them. If that Taoist Jiang isn't here, I have a high chance of success. Taoist Jiang asked, How should the two of you deal with this person? In his opinion, Chu Changji had set up such a grand show of force. He wouldn't just go up and attack without any standards. He should have made some ingenious arrangements. Chu Changji smiled and said, "Of course, Taoist. Come and take a look." He walked to the window and pointed outside. "I heard that Daoren is an expert in escape techniques. I think that Taoist Zhang might have the same method. In order to prevent him from escaping, I set up 64 formation flags within a radius of 50 li. This formation has the effect of slowing down one's movement. Once it's activated, it'll be like a boulder weighing thousands of kilograms on one's body. As long as this person falls into this formation, he'll be at our mercy." The Taoist with the surname Jiang nodded. He was someone who was proficient in escape techniques, but if he were to fall into this formation, he would lose 70% of his ability. Thus, he asked worriedly, "How will I be able to move within the formation?" Chu Changji laughed and took out a talisman. He stuffed it into Taoist Zhang's hand and said, "With this talisman, you'll be able to enter and exit unhindered." Taoist Jiang kept it and calmed down. He asked again, "Will Taoist Zhang definitely come here?" Chu Changji said, "Taoist brother, don't worry. As the person in charge of the Celestial City, Taoist Zhang won't ignore our actions. Now that everything is ready, we just need to wait for this person to fall into our trap." Chapter 639. P.S. A few days ago, I sprained my muscles and had a hard time writing. After resting for a few days, I'm finally feeling better. After Chu Changji finished speaking, he glanced at Taoist Jiang, who seemed to be hesitant. "Taoist Jiang, do you have any concerns?" Taoist Jiang said, "I do have some concerns, but I don't know if I should say it." Chu Changji looked over and smiled. "It's fine. Now that we're on the same boat, you can't escape, but you can't escape me. If you have anything to say, just say it." Taoist Jiang naturally understood what he meant. He laughed dryly and said, "Spiritual Master Chu's arrangements are very appropriate. It should be enough to deal with Taoist Zhang. However, according to what I know, there are many powerful artifacts in the Celestial City. If I were him, I would definitely bring them with me just in case." Chu Changji said, "Fellow Taoist's words are not without reason. When Yong Fu fought with Taoist Zhang, he did take out a few powerful magic treasures. However, I'm a little puzzled as to why he didn't use them when he fought with Taoist Yang." Taoist Jiang hurriedly said, "I'm not trying to scare you. Taoist Jiang should know that Yong Fu and I are good friends." After a few drinks, he would reveal some information. It's said that there's a powerful artifact in the Celestial City that has been passed down since the city was built. It can only be used by the owner. However, once it's used, one's lifespan will be shortened and one's life will be lost. Perhaps that's why Taoist Yong didn't dare to use it easily. However, if his life is in danger, it's inevitable that Taoist Zhang won't risk his life. Chu Changji nodded slowly and cupped his hands. "I still have to thank you, Taoist Jiang." Taoist Jiang hurriedly returned the gesture. "You're too kind, too kind." Chu Changji smiled and patted him on the shoulder. "Don't worry, Taoist Jiang. This time, it's not just the three of us. There are a few other helpers, so there's no need to worry." Taoist Jiang was a little surprised. Although there were many Yuanian cultivators in the Dongsheng continent, they were all people in charge of a region. Usually, it was extremely difficult to gather a few of them, especially now that the Zhongtai sect was fighting with the Xianyue sect. The cultivators of the two sects were too busy to leave. As for the other itinerant cultivators, as long as they had the slightest bit of cultivation, they would not leave their sects for fear of being implicated. His sect had received a secret order to capture Demon King and Crocodile. How could Chu Changji find a helper in such a short time? However, since the other party had said so, he could only choose to believe him. After saying a few more words, he entered the cabin to meditate. About half an hour passed. Chu Changji's expression suddenly changed, as if he had sensed something. Wang Guangyuan stood up and looked outside. He then looked at Taoist Jiang vaguely and said vaguely, "Senior Marshal Brother, someone is coming from the north." Chu Changji stood up calmly and looked out as well. It was noon and the sun was high in the sky. At the end of the horizon, there were two escape lights overflowing with demonic chi flashing through the air. But after a little closer, the black wind and turbid air that blew over seemed to have a bit of a fishy smell. He couldn't help but frown. This time, he had asked for help from the Python tribe to kill Zhang Yan. This was not only to increase their chances of success, but also to test the sincerity of the other party as an ally. However, the few elders of the Python tribe that he had met were mostly on the path of righteous Qi Dao, while these two people were obviously on the path of evil. It was obvious that they were not from the Luo tribe. He lowered his head and thought for a moment, then said, "Junior Marshal brother, follow me out to welcome them." He turned around and walked out of the cabin. Wang Guangyuan muttered something. It was obvious that he was unwilling, but he had to go out to welcome them. Daoist Jiang thought for a moment and followed him out. The three of them stood still on the deck. Not long after, the two rays of light arrived and landed on the boat one after the other. The black chi that wrapped around the boat shook a few times before dissipating. Two old men walked out. The one in the lead was slightly taller. He was half bald, but there were strands of silver hair on his temples and the back of his head. They were sparse like the whiskers of a carp. His eyes were slightly yellow, and there were large white spots on his cheeks. He was very ugly. The other person was slightly shorter and looked similar to him. Their clothes were also the same. It was obvious that they were brothers. The slightly older person first looked at the two of them, then straightened his body and stood there. He raised his hand as a greeting and said loudly, "Which one of you is Spiritual Master Chu? This old man is Yu Jia, and this is my younger brother, Yu. Today, we have come to help under the orders of our tribe's elders." Wang Guangyuan curled his lips in disdain. Just by hearing their names, he knew that they were rogue cultivators with no background. When the Taoist with the surname Jiang saw the two of them, his expression changed slightly. However, he immediately acted as if nothing had happened, but his heart was in turmoil. He didn't expect Chu Changji to be so bold as to dare collude with the North Sea Demon tribe. The Zhongtai sect had once issued a strict order that all cultivators and citizens of the sect were not allowed to interact with the North Sea Demon tribe without permission. Those who disobeyed would be severely punished. For more than 100 years, those who dared to cross the line were all beheaded without exception. In particular, he was the guest of the 6th Prince of Chu. His identity was even more sensitive. If people found out about this, he would most likely lose his life. He was invited here by Chu Changji with all his might. He originally thought that it was because of his family's escape technique, but now that he thought about it, there was probably another purpose. However, it was too late for regret now. He didn't doubt that if he behaved strangely, he would be killed by the two of them immediately. But Chu Changji was clearly a disciple of Hui Xian and had a close relationship with the Zhongtai sect. Why did he do this? Chu Changji walked over and greeted them with a smile. "Are you two disciples of Taoist Luo?" Yu Jia replied, "We brothers were originally cultivators of Seal Fall Island. Third elder didn't abandon us and took us in as guests." Chu Changji's eyes revealed a look of realization. No wonder he had never heard of these two people. After the Python tribe occupied the Beima Sea realm, they took all the scattered demon cultivators in the sea as their subordinates. If they met people with good aptitudes, they would help them cultivate. As a result, their strength had grown a lot. These two brothers should have only become Yuanying in the past 100 years. He was slightly dissatisfied. In comparison, the Luo clan not only had a strong foundation, but they also had divine arts and Dao techniques. These two people didn't meet his expectations, but since they were here, they would still be of help. Thus, he was still polite on the surface. He nodded slightly and moved to the side, saying, "Fellow Taoists, please. We'll be dealing with that great enemy later, so why don't we discuss some countermeasures together?" Yu Yi rolled his eyes and said proudly, "With us brothers here, what enemy can't we take down? If Spiritual Master Chu feels that you can't handle that Taoist Zhang, you can just leave him to us. Why bother discussing?" Not only did he think highly of himself, but there was also a hint of mockery in his words. Chu Changji revealed a hint of fierceness, but it only appeared for a moment before it disappeared again. He took out 2 talismans from his sleeve and smiled. That's fine too. I've set up a formation here, so I need these talismans to protect myself. Please keep them well. Formation. The Yu brothers looked at him with disdain. Yu Jia stepped forward and waved his sleeve, keeping the 2 talismans. Then, the 2 of them each grabbed a ball of black smoke from their sleeves and threw it on the ground. The smoke enveloped the 2 of them and flew up to 1,000 feet in the air. They hung there motionlessly, as if they didn't want to be associated with the 3 of them. Chu Changji and the other 2 took a few glances at them before returning to the cabin. After they sat down, Wang Guangyun slammed the tea table with anger in his eyes. He pointed outside and said, "Senior brother, who are these 2? How dare they be so arrogant in front of us?" Chu Changji smiled. "Don't be angry, junior brother. It's a good thing that they're willing to help. We'll let them take the lead later." He turned to look at Taoist Jiang, who was sitting at the side in a daze. He asked, "Fellow Taoist, you look pale. Are you feeling unwell?" Taoist Jiang seemed to be startled and hurriedly said, I'm fine. Chu Changji looked at him meaningfully and said, "It's good that you're fine. We'll need fellow Taoists' help later." At this moment, Wang Guangyuan said darkly, "Taoist Jiang, you have to keep that talisman safe. If anything unexpected happens, even we won't be able to help you." Taoist Jiang's heart sank. He was not stupid and immediately guessed that the talisman had been tampered with. He forced a smile and cupped his hands. "I'll follow your lead later." Chu Changji no longer paid attention to him and sat cross-legged on the bed. Wang Guangyuan chuckled and closed his eyes as well. Taoist Jiang gritted his teeth. Since the matter had already been dragged into a pit of fire, he could only take it one step at a time. With 5 people against 1, if nothing unexpected happened, victory should be within their grasp. Once they got rid of Taoist Jiang, they would see if there was a chance for them to escape. He waited uneasily for about a quarter of an hour. It was already the end of the afternoon. At this moment, there was the sound of a strong wind blowing in the sky. Chu Changji's body trembled and he said in a low voice, "It's here." The 3 of them came out of the cabin at the same time and looked forward. They saw a blazing rainbow light coming from the south. As it got closer, the waves on the sea became stronger and stronger. Even the floating boat they were on was shaking violently as if it would capsize at any time. Chu Changji was shocked. This person was still more than 5 kilometers away, but he could already cause such a commotion. How strong was his transcendence energy? He couldn't help but rejoice that he had overestimated his opponent and set up a formation in advance. Otherwise, it would have been troublesome. In just a few breaths' time, the escaping light was already 1,000 feet away. Then, it retracted and suddenly disappeared, revealing a Taoist with an imposing appearance. Above his head were 3 masses of strong clouds, 2 real and 1 fake. The spiritual energy around him was like a tide, fluctuating back and forth, actually forcefully pressing down on the surface of the sea to form a whirlpool. When his eyes swept over like lightning, everyone felt their hearts palpitate. Yu Jia and Yu Yi also seemed to feel the threat of the approaching person. They dispersed the black smoke and descended from the sky, taking the initiative to stand together with the 3 of them. Zhang Yan looked at the dozens of floating boats below. His eyes flashed and he waved his sleeve. A ball of light exploded and scattered towards where the 5 of them were standing. The 5 of them couldn't tell what kind of Taoist technique this was. Out of caution, they didn't face it head-on. Instead, they scattered in all directions. Chu Changji hurriedly looked back and was shocked. He saw the ball of light descend and in an instant, the dozens of floating boats disappeared into thin air at the same time. Chapter 640. As the person in charge of the immortal city of Mount Divine House, Zhang Yan had come to stop the North Sea demon tribe from burying soil near the coast to build a continent. As soon as he arrived, he used the 5 elements escape art to move the dozens of boats elsewhere. It could be said that once this was done, the purpose of this trip had already been mostly accomplished. The next step was to deal with these people. Chu Changji also came to his senses quickly. However, these dozens of boats were bait. so it didn't matter even if they were destroyed. Now that he had lured Zhang Yan into the formation, there was no need to think too much about it. Only Wang Guangyuan almost vomited blood when he saw this. The jade clay in these dozens of boats were all his savings, but now it was unknown where they had been moved. He was afraid that he would never be able to find them again. After Chu Changji pulled a distance away from Zhang Yan, he secretly took out a flag from his sleeve and waved it lightly. The formation hidden in the sea was activated. The spiritual qi around Zhang Yan seemed to be compressed by an invisible force and shrank by half. Seeing that the formation had taken effect, he put away the talismans and shouted, "Fellow Taoists, attack!" Although he shouted loudly, he intentionally slowed down his movements. Although it was rumored that he was very aggressive in Dongsheng continent, in reality, he was cautious by nature. Every time he fought someone, he would first figure out the opponent before attacking. If he didn't know the opponent's background, he wouldn't attack rashly unless he was confident. According to Wang Guangyuan's description, Zhang Yan had at least 2 powerful Taoist techniques. He had really racked his brains for this. After thinking about it, he felt that it wasn't appropriate to get close, so he could only attack from a distance with his treasures. Wang Guangyuan had been seriously injured by the heavy nether-een water last time, so he was very afraid of Zhang Yan. He was also lagging behind. Only the 2 brothers, Yu Jia and Yu Yi, heard his call and each took out an iron whip. With a howl, they wrapped themselves in a ball of demonic wind and rushed forward. When Chu, Wang, and Jiang saw them, they knew that these 2 people were cultivators of the strength path who relied on their sturdy bodies to charge forward recklessly. Rushing forward to take the lead was exactly what they wanted. Wang Guangyuan spread out his palm, and dozens of frost-colored swords flew into the air. Taoist Jiang summoned a pair of silver flying hooks in the sky. In Chu Changji's hand was a goldstone flying pill that he had meticulously refined. Once this item was sent out, within 1,000 feet, it could easily shatter the protective treasure light. The 3 of them each took out their magic treasures, waiting for Zhang Yan to reveal a flaw so that they could take advantage of his misfortune. Zhang Yan did not move. If it was Qi Path Cultivator, he was suddenly attacked by an array formation restriction. It would definitely be difficult for them to move forward. If they were attacked by enemies at the same time, their lives would be in danger. However, he had already reached the 4th level of the divine contract. This little bit of power was not enough to restrain him. With a sweep of his gaze, he saw the situation of the 5 people present. Facing the Yu brothers who were charging at him, with a thought, a bright arc of light suddenly leaped up from behind him and circled around him. Suddenly, 1 turned into 2, 2 turned into 4, and then it turned into 16 rays of light that swiftly chopped down towards the 2 of them. When Chu Changji saw this, he cried out involuntarily, "Flying swords!" Cold sweat appeared on his back. No matter how much he had overestimated his opponent, he did not think that the other party was actually a sword cultivator. Not to mention that this kind of cultivator's attacks were sharp, his movement techniques were far superior to his peers. He secretly rejoiced in his heart that he had the foresight to set up the array a step earlier. Otherwise, the other party could leave and stay as he pleased. His side would not be able to stop this person at all. On the contrary, if they did not stick together, it was possible that they would be defeated one by one. The Yu brothers also did not expect their opponent to be a sword cultivator. Seeing the sword lights coming straight for their eyes and necks, they roared angrily and withdrew the divine weapons in their hands to protect themselves. However, how could they block all 16 sword lights? In an instant, their shoulders, backs, arms, legs, and other parts of their bodies were all torn open with cuts so deep that their bones could be seen. Their bodies were stained with blood from head to toe. However, to a strength path cultivator, these kinds of injuries were not life-threatening. Instead, it aroused the ferocious nature in their hearts. The 2 of them let out wild roars and their figures only paused for a moment before continuing to charge forward. When they were within 10 feet of Zhang Yan, they shouted in unison and raised the divine weapons in their hands, aiming for Zhang Yan's head with a woo-woo sound. Zhang Yan's expression did not change. He calmly waved his sleeves and a ray of light flashed across. After a flash, The two of them actually disappeared from his sight, leaving him alone in the air. Chu Changji and the other two were dumbstruck when they saw this scene. Previously, Zhang Yan had caused the dozens of floating boats to disappear. Now it was the Yu brothers' turn. Because they did not know what kind of Dao technique that was, the three of them hesitated for a moment. Zhang Yan ignored them. He only lifted his sleeves and said with a smile, "This place is vast and boundless, fellow Taoist Luo, why haven't you come out yet?" As soon as he finished speaking, his sleeves suddenly shook and a black shadow flew out. With a thud, it went straight into the water. After a moment, a black shadow could be faintly seen emerging from the sea. As it gradually expanded, an indescribable aura gradually spread out. He had never been an arrogant person. Since he had a great helper like Dragon Carp Luo Ren by his side, how could he not make use of it? However, this demon had transformed using transcendence energy and had been sleeping in his sleeves for many years. It would take a while for it to recover to its original state. Therefore, he focused on delaying it. Once it had sealed off this part of the world, he would be able to take care of the five of them one by one. Chu Changji instinctively felt that something was wrong and shouted, "Junior brother, fellow Taoist Jiang, quickly make your move. It's too late." Zhang Yan smiled and pressed his hand against the air. The 16 sword lights paused for a moment before abruptly exploding in all directions. The sword lights were extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, they had already closed in on them. The three of them could not be bothered to attack anymore, and each of them activated their protective treasured light and transcendent artifacts. However, the sword lights did not retreat and continued to circle around them. Chu Changji was experienced and knowledgeable. He knew that once the wandering sword lights found an opening and slipped in, their lives would be taken in an instant. He was forced to be on full alert and did not dare to be careless. As for Wang Guangyuan and Taoist Jiang, they simply retreated 1,000 feet away. Although they were no longer threatened by the sword lights, they were no longer a threat to Zhang Yan. Chu Changji glanced at the two of them with a slightly dissatisfied look on his face. He had painstakingly laid out the restrictive formation in order to restrict Zhang Yan's movements so that they could attack as they pleased. But if they only knew how to dodge, what was the point? At this moment, the surface of the sea a few miles away suddenly burst open. Two pillars of water shot up and two tall and sturdy figures appeared. Chu Changji turned around and saw that it was the two Yu brothers who had reappeared. He couldn't help but feel happy and relaxed at the same time. He thought to himself, just now, that Taoist Zhang is only using a teleportation technique. This is much easier to deal with. If Zhang Yan could subdue the two Yuanian cultivators with just a wave of his hand, then there would be no need to fight. It would be better for them to escape as soon as possible. Just now, the two Yu brothers hadn't even displayed their abilities when they were teleported into the sea by Zhang Yan. They were seabirds that had turned into spirits and weren't good at swimming. They had choked on a few mouthfuls of seawater and felt stifled in their hearts. At this moment, they rushed forward again, wishing they could smash Zhang Yan's head with a whip. When Zhang Yan saw the two of them appear in front of him again, he smiled faintly and waved his sleeves again. The Yu brothers only saw a blur in front of them and knew that something was wrong. They hurriedly tried to dodge, but at this moment, a pressure descended from the sky. Everyone present felt their bodies stiffen as if they had been bound by some great force. They couldn't move at all. Chu Changji exclaimed in shock, "Heaven and earth seal?" Zhang Yan turned his gaze. Chu Changji was a second-layer Yuanian cultivator and was the first person he wanted to get rid of. With a flick of his finger, the drop of Xianming heavy water flew through the air and pierced through Chu Changji's head. However, Chu Changji's entire body trembled and actually turned into a ball of spiritual essence that slowly floated away before finally dissipating in the atmosphere. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows in surprise. A clone! The surroundings were sealed by the Heaven and Earth Prohibition Lock technique. Chu Changji thought that if he were to use the Devil Sex death substitution technique in such a situation, it would be impossible for him to not notice. In that case, perhaps this person had appeared as a clone from the beginning and his real body was probably somewhere else. Since that was the case, he simply ignored him. With a sword gesture in his mind, a sword ray flew 1,000 feet away and the Jiang Daoist's head immediately fell off. Just as he was about to attack the two Yu brothers again, Dragon Carprueran suddenly said, "Master, those two bird demons are also mutated species and still have some use. Why don't you let me deal with them?" Zhang Yan thought for a moment and nodded. "All right." A wave suddenly rose from the sea and swept the Yu brothers away, disappearing without a trace. At this moment, only Wang Guangyuan was left on the scene. When he saw Zhang Yan looking at him, he was extremely terrified, but he still pretended to be calm. "Fellow Taoist Zhang, I don't have any deep grudges with you. If you let me go this time, I'm willing to offer all my belongings to you and even tell you a few secrets." Zhang Yan smiled faintly. He raised his hand and pointed at him. In an instant, a purple thunderbolt struck down with a loud bang. Wang Guangyuan had only become a nascent soul a few years ago and only had a few defensive magic tools on him. How could he resist such a level of Dao technique? In the blink of an eye, his body exploded and turned into fragments that filled the sky. Zhang Yan looked around and saw that the sea was already empty. He looked down and said, "Fellow Taoist Rueran, there's no water in the mountains. You can swim freely in this North Sea. Why don't you stay here and guard this sea area?" The sea churned and Dragon Carprueran poked her head out and said, "I'll definitely guard this place for Master." On the eastern boundary of the Divine House, in an uninhabited valley, Chu Changji's body trembled slightly and he woke up from his meditation. He wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and said with lingering fear, "This Taoist Zhang actually had the help of a third Yuanying cultivator. If I didn't have this mana clone to avoid disaster, I'm afraid I'd also be in trouble." This Dao technique of his was secretly passed down by Hui Xian elder ancestor. He could cultivate a clone that was no different from him. Other than not being able to use divine arts, he could also use treasures and escape techniques. Even if it was broken by others, it wouldn't be a big deal. After cultivating for another year and a half, he could cultivate it again. However, when he used it, his real body couldn't move and had to sit in the cave. If he was disturbed at this time, he would immediately die from the rupture of his meridians. Therefore, even his junior brother Wang Guangyuan didn't know that he knew this divine art. Before the battle, he was already prepared for failure. This time, it would be best if he could get rid of Zhang Yan. If he couldn't, it would be a test. Even if there were losses, it wouldn't be too big. He stood up and smiled bitterly. "Even though I know that Taoist Zhang has many tricks up his sleeves, he's not someone to be trifled with. Never mind, I'll first return to the sect and tell teacher about junior brother Wang's death. Let's see what arrangements he has." Chapter 641. After Zhang Yan dealt with Chu Changji and the other four, he flew through the clouds and returned to the sect. He sat down in the middle of the hall and ordered a boy to summon Chu, Wen and Zhao, 3 people. He briefly recounted his journey and concluded, "The boat near the sea has been destroyed by me. Other than Chu Changji, whose whereabouts are unknown, the other 4 have been executed." After hearing this, the 3 of them were pleasantly surprised. They looked at Zhang Yan with eyes full of reverence. They didn't expect this sect master to be so amazing. Even when fighting 1 against 5, he could still win. Moreover, he didn't look tired at all. It seemed like he won easily. Only now did they have some understanding of this senior brother's ability. Chu Mu Ran thought about it and went forward to cup his hands. "Mannerhead, since Chu Changji, Wang Guangyuan, and the others actually colluded with the northern demon cultivators, then this matter is definitely not related to Zhongtai sect. Let's first confirm that those thieves used their names. I intend to spread this news to appease the hearts of the sects in the mountain." Zhang Yan nodded in agreement. Junior brother Chu's suggestion is correct. We need to make the sect calm down as soon as possible and cultivate in peace. We will do as you say. Zhao Gu raised his head. "Senior brother, will Hui Xian elder come looking for us?" Chu Mu Ran stroked his beard and smiled. "Junior brother, colluding with the North Sea demon tribe is a great crime. Even Hui Xian elder wouldn't dare to commit such a heinous crime." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That might not be the case. I heard fellow Taoist Yong mention this fellow Taoist Hui Xian, and I heard that his cultivation has already attained the 3rd level of the nascent soul realm. How could such a figure be restrained by ordinary rules? If I were him, I wouldn't have an excuse. I'll just find another one. Yuanying 3rd layer cultivators were different from ordinary cultivators. Other than Dong Tian Jinren, no one could intimidate them. Just like Shen Baishuang, he was a cultivator from another continent and brazenly occupied an immortal city. However, Zhongtai sect, which was nearby, turned a blind eye to him. If Hui Xian elder wanted to take revenge for his disciple, even if he didn't get entangled in this matter, he could still make a fuss elsewhere. This was just an excuse. Why would he be afraid that someone would appear and obstruct him? Hearing these words, Chu Mulan had just let go of his worries, but now he was back on alert again. Even Wen and Zhao's expressions grew tense. Looking at their expressions, Zhang Yan gestured with his hand and said in a clear voice, "Junior Marshall brothers, you don't have to worry. I made my move." Wasn't he afraid that this person would come looking for him? Everything is as usual. The 3 of them were now very respectful towards this senior martial brother. Hearing him speak so confidently, they did not think that he was boasting. Chu Mu Ran took a deep breath and said, "Since senior brother sect leader has said so, then there's nothing to worry about." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "I need to meditate in the mountains and train the disciples. Usually, if it's not very important, there's no need for you 3 junior brothers to come and ask me. You can discuss it among yourselves." At present, he had already reorganized the structure of the mountain. Whether it was the disciples or the elders, they were all in their respective positions. It was no longer as disorderly as when Shen Baishuang was around. There was also no need for them to ask for his instructions every day. It was enough for Chu, Wen, and Zhao to handle it. Since the sect was already stable, he did not need to put his mind on it. He was prepared to cultivate with all his might, hoping to reach the 2nd stage of Yuaning. Seeing that there was nothing else, the 3 of them bowed and took their leave. After a few days, the news of Chu Changji's group being defeated and the nearby floating islands being cleared spread. When the cultivators of Shenwu Mountain heard about it, they were all excited. With such a skilled cultivator guarding Shenwu Mountain, they would no longer have to fear the invasion of the North Sea Demon tribe. When Yongfu heard the news, he immediately took care of his disciple by Jiang and said, "Pass down my order. From now on, all the disciples of Mount Yi sect are not to provoke Hanyuan sect." When the head of Wui sect, Sun Tong, was informed of the matter by his disciple, he was stunned for a long time. He then hurriedly ordered his son's son Xiuqing to be brought back and scolded, "You unfilial son, I told you not to interact with that Hanyuan sect disciple. Now that disaster has come, you killed Wang Guangyuan and offended Chu Changji. Why would Elder Hui Xian let that Zhang Daoist go? This matter will definitely implicate our Wui sect. Quickly pack up and follow me to Chu to seek refuge with your Sherbua." Sun Xiuqing was stunned for a moment before he laughed out loud. Sun Tong said angrily and shyly, "Unfilial son, what are you laughing at? Did I say something wrong?" Sun Xiuqing pointed outside and said, "Father, why don't you look at the situation outside the mountain now? Zhongtai Upper Sect and Xianyu Sect are fighting fiercely. For someone like Elder Hui Xian, even if he sits quietly in the immortal cities of the prefectures and prefectures, he can intimidate his enemies and will not easily leave without permission. Why would he muster such a large force for a disciple who colluded with a demon cultivator? Father, do you believe that not only will Elder Hui Xian not come to take revenge, he will also try his best to clear himself of this matter so that Xianyu sect won't make a fuss about it?" Sun Tong said doubtfully, "Really?" Sun Xiuqing snorted and said, "Even if he really wants to make a fuss, he will not do it now. He will have to wait for the 2 sects to stop fighting before he can take action. These 2 sects have fought 3 times in 1,000 years, which one of them did not decide the victor within 30 to 50 years. At this point, he smiled again. In the past, those few lads from the Zhou family were arrogant, but now they also look like they are fawning over me. Isn't it because I have long sought refuge with Hanyuan sect? Father, you are in too much of a hurry to leave before you get the benefits." Sun Tong lowered his head and thought for a while. He realized that it was as his son said, Zhongtai sect and Xianyu sect were both rich in resources. There were tens of thousands of cultivators in their sections. In a short period of time, no one would be able to suppress the other, and no one knew how long the fight would last. He coughed and softened his tone. He put on a stern face and pretended to be dignified. I will personally visit Zhenrenzhang another day. Introduce me to him. Son Xiuqing chuckled and bowed deeply, saying, I will have to disappoint father. Manor Master Zhang has been cultivating in seclusion and will not see any guests. But if there is a chance, I will definitely mention it. After Zhang Yan had been cultivating in seclusion, other than coming out once a month to check the disciples' homework, he almost never left the house. He sat on the bed all day, refining Jun Yang's essence. A year passed peacefully like this. On this day, a boy outside the door reported, Sect Master, Zhenren has returned to the mountain. He is waiting outside the door. Zhang Yan's expression brightened, and he said loudly, Quick, invite Zhang in. After a while, Zhang Boyan strode into the cave and bowed, saying, Greetings, Manor Master. Zhang Yan looked at him up and down and smiled, saying, Fellow Taoist, your cultivation seems to have improved. Zhang Boyan sighed and said, It is also a coincidence. My cultivation method is not the best in the Netherworld Spring sect. It is not easy to cultivate and my progress is slow. I can't compare to those direct disciples. This time, I happen to buy an item outside the mountain, and it is very useful to me. If I can use this item to cultivate for a few decades, I will be able to enter the second stage of yuaning. Zhang Yan smiled and cupped his hands, saying, Then I really have to congratulate fellow Taoist. Zhang Boyan hurriedly returned the bow, saying, Thank you, Manor Master. But the great Tao is hard to find. If there is no great opportunity, I am afraid this junior will stop here. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. What Zhang Boyan said was the truth. Cultivating Tao cannot reach the heavenly cave, and one can only live for 1,000 years. Only by entering the elephant realm and continuing to cultivate, can one have the hope of breaking through the void and jumping out of this world. But since ancient times, there were very few people who achieved this. At this time, Zhang Boyan said again, This time, I went out under the Manor Master's order. In a celestial city, I was invited to be a guest by a cultivator who called himself the 6th Prince of Chu. I stayed there for a few days, but I didn't expect to meet Wang Guangyuan's master, ancestor Hui Xian. Zhang Yan's eyebrows raised slightly, and he said in a deep voice, Has this person ever been a friend? Although Zhang Boyan left the mountain to buy pill materials, he did not go far after all, and was still within the borders of Chu. After Zhang Yan killed Wang Guangyuan and the other three, he was afraid that ancestor Hui Xian would harm him, so he sent a letter to inform him of this matter, and asked him to be careful. Zhang Boyan shook his head, saying, Not really. He even said to me at the banquet that Wang Guangyuan deserved to be killed by Manor Master, and Chu Changji colluded with the North Sea Demon tribe without permission, so he was expelled from the sect, and what happened in the future has nothing to do with him. Zhang Yan's thoughts changed. This Hui Xian ancestor seemed to be impartial, but he separated Wang Guangyuan and Chu Changji to talk about and not chase them out of the sect together. There was something worth pondering about. Zhang Boyan said, Manor Master, here is another letter. The 6th Prince of Chu asked me to pass it to you. Zhang Yan took the letter and opened it to take a look. What entered his eyes were some greetings and admiring words, written in flowery words, and written in 4 lines and 6 lines. He roughly glanced at it and then skipped over it. As for the content after that, it was generally said that now the two sects were fighting for supremacy and the battle was fierce. Hearing that the person in charge of Celestial City of Shenwu Mountain had profound skills, he invited him to contribute to the upper sect, and if he made a contribution, he would not hesitate to give him the title of a city. The wording of this letter was very careful, and written very politely, without the slightest intention of forcing him. Fight for Zhongtai sect? Zhang Yan smiled and shook his head. It was not that this matter could not be discussed, but he was afraid that the 6th prince would not be able to give him what he wanted. The other party sent this letter as a foreshadowing for future dealings, but there was no need to think too much about it now. He put the letter aside, and asked about matters that he was concerned about. Zhang, how many elixir materials have you bought on this trip? Zhang Boyan replied solemnly, with the token given by the manor master, I have traveled to various celestial cities in Chu for the past year. Other than 2 or 3 elixir materials that were not easy to find, I have found most of the items listed on the list. I was afraid that the manor master would need them urgently, so I rushed back first. He shook his sleeve, and a snow-white frost smoke flew out from it and landed on the ground, rolling out several feet. He then clenched his fist and kept the smoke, revealing hundreds of neatly arranged jade boxes. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, and he stood up, walking to those jade boxes. He picked one up, opened it for a moment, and then carefully put it down, and stretched out his hand to pick up another. These elixir materials were related to the achievement of his Dharmakaya in the future, and he could not neglect any of them. He must personally see them before he could rest assured. Therefore, he opened every jade box and carefully examined them. In the end, he secretly nodded and thought, Dongsheng continent is indeed several times bigger than Donghua, with vast land and abundant resources, and there is also a celestial city, a place where treasures of heaven and earth gather. After these elixir materials are refined in the furnace, it is enough for me to use for more than 20 years, but the 2 or 3 items that are missing need to be found as soon as possible and cannot be delayed any longer. Chapter 642. Zhang Yan calculated in his mind. Currently, he only lacked 4 ingredients: the Panchan pill, the hidden lotus, the snake ring jewel, and the ghost sunflower. The Panchan pill was formed in the belly of a venomous bug. It wasn't safe to have only one golden spider. Thankfully, Zhang Boyan had caught a few more along the way. After feeding them with the silk hibiscus seed, it would take at most 10 years to condense a pill pearl. As for the other 3, he needed to find other avenues. Zhang Boyan said, I have seen many cultivators from the Dongsheng continent looking for rare treasures. Most of them offered rewards and enticed them with benefits. With the celestial city in your hands, you might as well follow suit. I believe you will be able to gain something. Zhang Yan nodded and said, Taoist Zhang's reminder is correct. I've thought about this before, but with Wang Guangyuan and the others stirring up trouble here, I'm afraid that they'll play tricks on the side and it won't be good, so I didn't put it into action. Now that Wang Guangyuan is dead and Hui Xian has expelled Chu Changji from the sect, there shouldn't be any worries in the near future, so I can give it a try. However, I still need to trouble Taoist Zhang to go somewhere else, so that we won't waste any time. Zhang Boyan cupped his hands and said, I can leave now. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, Zhang, there is no hurry. I have been reading the ancient books in the city and found some clues. Rumor has it that someone has seen the ghost sunflower in the east of the Luoduan Mountains. Why don't you go there? Luoduan Mountains were the dividing line between Mount Wu and the east and west. The east was not as densely populated as the west. It was a barren land filled with poisonous insects and fierce beasts. Zhang Boyan laughed. If there is really it in Mount Wu, it will be very easy. I will definitely get it for you. He had traveled almost all the celestial cities in Chu in the past year. However, Chu was ruled by the Zhongtai sect. The disciples of this sect were arrogant when facing cultivators from other sections. Only when facing a Yuanying Taoist like him did they restrain themselves a little. However, because of his cultivation, every move he made was watched. He couldn't let go of his hands and feet, but he didn't have to worry so much when he went to an isolated place. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Fellow Taoist, it's not easy for you to cultivate outside. My cave abode on Tsangzhu Peak has already been repaired, so I'll lend this 7 treasures great pagoda to you. He pointed with his finger, and the pagoda outside his body turned into a stream of light, shrinking to a height of half a foot. He held it in his palm and handed it over. Zhang Boyan didn't refuse. After expressing his gratitude, he took the great pagoda pavilion and bowed deeply before leaving the mountain. After watching him leave, Zhang Yan was about to enter the hall. Suddenly, his mind moved, and his expression showed that he was listening attentively. After a long while, he slightly frowned and said to himself, Python tribe. Just now, it was Dragon Carp Lyran who sent him a telepathic message, telling him that there were a few core formation demon cultivators coming to the Divine House Mountain, but they were all captured by him. Not a single one was left out. Zhang Yan thought to himself. While the North Sea Taoist tribe might not be able to do much because they were wary of the 5 great sects of the Dongsheng continent, they would still be a problem. Even with the Dragon Carp's protection, the sea was vast, and it was inevitable that they would slip up. If they caused trouble from time to time, he might have to deal with it himself. He thought for a moment. Then, he barked at Jiang He, who was at the foot of the mountain, "Where is Lu Changsu?" As soon as his voice rang out, a white light rose from the waters and a burly figure appeared, kneeling before the peak and greeting respectfully, "This little demon greets you, Prefecture Master." Zhang Yan invoked a hand seal, and with a flash of white light from his sleeve, the 72 10,000 beast sleeping moon streamers flew out at once and stuck themselves in the empty space in front of him. Clasping his hands behind his back, he said, "I'm handing over the 200,000 demonic soldiers to you. Find a body of water outside the North Sea and stay there. Stop any demonic cultivators coming from the north, and do not let them enter the Divine House Mountain realm." Lu Changsu's subordinates were all of the marine race, and even if there were no islands to stay in, they could still come and go as they pleased. Moreover, if the formation was not used for a long time, it would be rather rusty. Letting them go back was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Lu Changsu, however, was a little uneasy. After hesitating for a moment, he carefully said, "Prefecture Master, the North Sea seems to have one of the 8 great demonic tribes of the North Sea continent, the Python tribe. I'm not afraid, but I'm afraid that I'm not strong enough and will ruin your plans." Zhang Yan smiled. "You don't have to be afraid. Fellow Taoist Ji is also there. You only need to take care of some of the small fries. It will take care of those who are slightly skilled." Only then did Lu Changsu feel relieved. He kowtowed and said, "I understand, I'll leave now." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Don't make too much noise when you go." Lu Changsu responded and stood up. He made a hand seal and rolled the 72 banners into his sleeves. Then, following Zhang Yan's instructions, he didn't dare to make too much noise. He turned into a wisp of smoke and quietly disappeared into the clouds. In a flash, he had gone far away. Zhang Yan returned to the cave dwelling. After sitting down on the couch, he first made a hand seal and set up a restrictive formation. Then, he shook his sleeves, and with a flash of light, more than 20 magical weapons leaped out of the air. In an instant, he heard shrill screams and countless black fog and evil chi clamoring. It was as if they were going to crash out of the cave dwelling. His expression didn't change. He pressed his hand down and mana gushed out from his body. The magical weapons that were wandering around the room immediately calmed down and floated in front of him. Most of these magical weapons were taken from the hands of the cultivators of the Devil sect during the sword competition of the 16 sects. There were even a few profound weapons among them. It was just that most of these treasures were made of evil and filthy materials. Not to mention that they were not compatible with his cultivation method. If his cultivation was not strong enough, not only would he not be able to control them, his inner yuan would easily be polluted and his mind would be infected. Therefore, it was not convenient for him to give them to his disciple. This time, he could use them as a reward. After picking and choosing, he finally took out 3 profound weapons. Then, he told the Taoist boy outside the door, "Someone, go and find junior brother Zhao." Not long after, Zhao Gu entered the hall and bowed, "Greetings, senior brother." At this moment, the magic treasures were still hanging in the air, but he ignored them. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Junior brother Zhao, I need you to do something." Zhao Gu said in a low voice, "Senior brother, please tell me." A few days later, in the immortal city of Mount Shenwu, several superior profound weapons were displayed in the floating tower, saying that they wanted to exchange them for 3 kinds of spiritual items. Once the news spread, it immediately attracted countless attention. In the Dongsheng continent, most of the superior profound weapons were the treasures of a city. They would not be taken out easily. However, the immortal city of Mount Shenwu took out several of them at once. How could people not be surprised? Hearing this, even Yong Fu couldn't help but go to see. After seeing, he couldn't help but be tempted. With a good magical weapon, he would have a lot of advantages when fighting with others. As for the evil energy contained in the magical weapons, as a Yuanian cultivator, he was naturally not afraid. Moreover, he didn't think that he would need to use it often. However, he didn't have what Zhang Yan needed, so he wrote more than a dozen letters and asked his close friends. The immortal city of the Divine House Mountain immediately became much more lively. Many cultivators heard that this place could actually be exchanged for high-grade profound-level weapons, and they all came because of its reputation. Unfortunately, after half a month, no one was able to exchange the medicinal materials that Zhang Yan needed for a magic weapon. On this day, a man and a woman came to the city. The woman's body was lithe and graceful, and her figure was soft and beautiful. She was about 20 years old, and her hair was tied up in a bun. Her eyes were especially bright, and although her clothes were ordinary, her beauty was natural, and it was difficult to conceal her beauty. The man was dressed like a Taoist. He had a head full of silver hair, but his face didn't look old at all. Between his brows, there was a faint sense of awe-inspiring spirit. As the two walked, they attracted the attention of the cultivators on the way. The two seemed to be used to people's attention. After they got off the flying car, they went straight to the floating tower. When they entered the tower, they said that they wanted to see the 3 magic weapons. The Taoist in charge could see that the 3 of them were not ordinary people. He said, "I wonder if the 3 of you have brought the spirit herbs that the city lord needs?" The woman said, "The 2 of us also passed by here. We heard that in this immortal city, we can exchange spiritual items for profound weapons, so we rushed here. What are the requirements?" The Taoist in charge said, "There are 3 spirit herbs that the city lord needs. One can be exchanged for a treasure. They are the hidden earth lotus, the snake ring jewel, and the ghost sunflower." The woman smiled and said, "I've heard of the hidden earth lotus, and I happen to have it with me." The hidden earth lotus was a 100-year spirit lotus that was struck by lightning and buried underground for 1,000 years. It had a strange fragrance that could ward off evil and calm the mind. Therefore, it was deeply loved by some female cultivators. They would often grind it into powder and put it in a pouch to carry with them. She had a pouch on her. The Taoist in charge hurriedly said, "I'm afraid that your highness is too late. The spirit lotus that the city lord wants must be complete. There can't be a single flaw." The woman smiled lightly and said, "It's not impossible." She turned to the white-haired man beside her and asked, "Elder Yu, you're knowledgeable. Have you heard of the snake ring jewel and the ghost sunflower?" Elder Yu smiled reservedly and said, "The so-called snake ring jewel is actually 2 items. It's the skin that the evil snake sheds when it transcends its tribulation and then fills it with the purple sparrow elixir. After 100 days, it's taken out and the skin is cut open. A plate of white snake paste is obtained. However, because the evil snake's lifespan is short, most of them are born in spring and die in autumn. Therefore, it's rare for them to cultivate into monsters, and those that can take human form are even rarer, so it's extremely difficult to find them." The woman was unconvinced and said, "Could it be that even our sect doesn't have one?" Elder Yu didn't avoid the Taoist in charge and said very casually, "If it was on a normal day, Lady Lian only needs to say the word and thousands of cultivators would be willing to serve you. But now that our sect is fighting with Xianyu sect, we don't have enough manpower, so we can't do as you wish." Lady Lian sighed and said, "Then, what's the origin of the ghost sunflower?" Elder Yu thought for a while and said in a low voice, "The ghost sunflower is formed from resentment and grows in the wilderness. It's about 3 to 4 feet tall, with black stems and white leaves. It's hairy, and the flower's face is like a ghost's head. At noon, it's dark, and it's bent as if it's picking something up. Its roots are several miles long, and it becomes a monster after 100 years. It can capture white birds, and after 1,000 years, it becomes a monster. It can eat gray pythons, and it can be used to refine spells and incantations. It's just that this item isn't easy to pick, and the roots wither when they're broken. This old man has never seen the real thing before." Lady Lian's beautiful eyes flickered and she said, So there's such a wondrous item in this world. The Taoist in charge said in admiration, Taoist Zhang's knowledge is profound. In this half a month, no one has been able to tell the origin of these 3 items. Lady Lian said, This Taoist, can you bring those 3 magic treasures for me to take a look? The Taoist in charge didn't decline this time and said, Please wait a moment, this Taoist will go and bring them over right away. After he left, Elder Yu suddenly said, I'm afraid this city lord isn't a decent person. Lady Lian was startled and asked, Why? Chapter 643. P.S. Today's first update. Lian Yangzi was surprised. Haven't the heretical cultivators been extinct in Dongsheng continent for hundreds of years? Thousands of years ago, there were 8 sects in Dongsheng continent. Apart from today's 5 major sects, the remaining 3 were heretical sections. However, 2 of the sects lost order in their teachings, and the powerful cultivators died of old age one by one. The sects disappeared along with them, and even the mountain was divided by the 5 major sections. The remaining cultivators of the 2 sects went their separate ways, and established dozens of small sects in the continent, struggling at death's door. Because they were afraid of a resurgence, under the deliberate suppression of the 5 major sects, these cultivators had no choice but to hide in the wilderness, and many even went to other continents. More than 100 years ago, the last heretical sect, the Corpse Cult, was destroyed by the joint efforts of Fengxiang Sword School and Zhongtai sect. The heretical cultivators almost disappeared from Dongsheng continent. Elder Yu sneered, There are always fish that slip through the net. He wanted to say something, but suddenly heard footsteps, and he shut his mouth. The steward Taoist came out from the back of the hall, holding a wooden tray in his hand. On it were 3 talismans enshrouded in spiritual qi. When he came to the center of the hall, he very naturally placed them on the table, allowing the 2 to look at them. Zhang Yan had personally placed a restriction on the 3 talismans, and others would not be able to take them without some effort. Even if a 3rd-grade Yuaning cultivator came personally and forcefully broke through the restriction, he would not be able to break out of the outer immortal city's formation, so he was very assured. Seeing these 3 items, Lian Yangzi and Elder Yu's expressions changed. However, they also knew the crux of it, so they did not reach out to take it. They only looked at it from half a foot away. These 3 treasures were surrounded by spiritual light, and contained a faint aura, as if they were alive. This was because they had already developed spiritual consciousness, so they could resonate with a cultivator's spiritual vigor. However, the resonance was so strong, but it was unexpected, showing that these 3 items were not ordinary. Profound weapons were also divided into high and low levels, and usually they were not important to them. However, these 3 were all high level, and were rare treasures. If they took them back and offered them to the elders of the clan for sacrificial refining, perhaps after hundreds or thousands of years, he might even be able to nurture a true weapon. The deacon Taoist observed their expressions and saw that the 2 of them were moved. He then picked up a ball of net. He pointed at it and said, This magic treasure is called the 1000 Spirit Life-Seeking Star Knot. It was refined from the silk of a 1000-year-old demon spider. Even divine weapons and flying swords couldn't cut through it. If a cultivator fell into it, his soul would be taken away immediately. He's no different from a zombie. After he finished speaking, he slightly removed the restriction. In that instant, the 2 of them seemed to hear the cries of tens of thousands of wronged souls, and their heads became slightly dizzy. The deacon Taoist hurriedly suppressed the restriction, but even so, the 2 of them still felt the cries of the souls lingering in their ears. They couldn't help but exchange a surprised look. This magic treasure had not even been activated, and it was already so powerful. If it was truly refined for one's own use, how powerful would it be? This magic treasure was taken by Zhang Yan from the hands of Jiuling sect disciple Yan Huixin. There were dozens of restrictions within, and to truly refine it for one's own use, it would take at least a few years. Even so, he wasn't sure if Jiuling sect had any methods of tracking it. In reality, all the magic treasures of the devil sect had such hidden dangers, which was why he had never taken them out to use. This time, he could use them to obtain spiritual herbs. This wasn't a harmful move. There was a huge ocean between the two continents, and even those from the Paradise sect wouldn't be able to sense it. The Deacon Taoist then picked up the second magic treasure. This was a shield-shaped magic treasure, and it was half a foot long. On it, there was a ghost face with closed eyes, and it looked eerie and terrifying. As if it had sensed that someone was spying on it, it suddenly opened its eyes and grinned at the three people in the hall. That strange smile caused Lien Yangzi and Elder Yu to feel a chill in their hearts. The Deacon Taoist was already used to it, and his expression was as usual as he said, "This item is known as the Smiling Shield, and it's a protective treasure. However, it has a rebellious nature, and it needs to be tamed before it can be used." Elder Yu frowned and said, "This treasure is so disobedient. What's the use of me bringing it here?" The Deacon Taoist smiled and said, "Esteemed guest, please let me finish. This magic treasure has a benefit, and that is that the spiritual consciousness within it can absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. Even if it's damaged after a battle, it can still be as good as new within 7 days. There's no need for its owner to repair it, and its protective abilities won't be reduced in the slightest." Lien Yangzi said in surprise, "Oh? That's rare." Magic treasures were also easily damaged, especially when encountering powerful magic treasures. When the two clashed, the spiritual light would be worn down, and if the foundation of the magic treasure was accidentally damaged, even if it was refined afterward, it wouldn't be as good as it was in the beginning. Since this magic treasure had such capabilities, those flaws could be tolerated. Although Elder Yu no longer belittled it, his evaluation wasn't high either. He snorted and said, "It's a mixed bag of good and bad, but it still has some uses." The Deacon Taoist smiled and said, "According to my sect master, this magic treasure has another benefit, but this is not something I know." The two were startled, and couldn't help but take a few more glances at the shield. However, that ghostly face was too strange, and they both felt a little uncomfortable, so they didn't look at it any longer and shifted their gazes to the last profound artifact. This was a deathly white small axe. However, this time, the Deacon Taoist seemed to be deliberately keeping them in suspense, and kept his mouth shut. The two exchanged glances. Judging from the previous two items, this axe should be extraordinary as well, and it might even be superior to the previous two treasures. A trace of greed unconsciously appeared in the depths of Elder Yu's eyes, but he quickly concealed it. Lien Yangzi asked, "This deacon, apart from those few spiritual herbs, can your family exchange this item for anything else?" These days, the Deacon Taoist had heard such words more than once, and replied with a faint smile, "That's not possible." Lien Yangzi sighed softly and said, "Then I'll have to come another day." With that, she turned around and walked out. Elder Yu's gaze swept over the three profound artifacts, and then he followed her out. The Deacon Taoist bowed from behind and said, "Farewell, the two of you." Not long after the two left, Zhao Ge happened to be heading this way. He unintentionally glanced at their backs, and felt that one of them seemed a little familiar, but in the blink of an eye, they were already far away. He pondered on the spot for a while, and then stepped into the floating pavilion. The Deacon Taoist came up to him and bowed, saying, "Master." The three profound artifacts hadn't been put away yet, so Zhao Ge immediately saw them and asked, "Did those two just come to look at the magic treasures?" The Deacon Taoist said, "Yes, those two are knowledgeable, especially that silver-haired Taoist. He could actually tell the origins of the ghost sunflower and the snake ring jing in one go." Zhao Ge said solemnly, "If those two come again next time, report to me quickly." After Elder Yu and Lien Yangzi left the floating pavilion, they didn't speak a word. It was only when they were outside the immortal city that Elder Yu suddenly said, "Lien Yangzi, that magic treasure contained an extremely heavy evil aura. It seems that this person is undoubtedly an evil sect cultivator." Lien Yangzi was still thinking about how to find the three herbs when they returned, so she said indifferently, "Elder Yu worries too much. If he really is an evil sect cultivator, why would he need to make such a big fuss? Is he afraid that others won't know his origins?" Elder Yu smiled and said with a rather deep meaning in his words, "Whether this person is an evil sect remnant or not is actually not important. It all depends on what Lian Yangzi thinks." Lian Yangzi didn't say anything at first, but after flying half a mile away, she suddenly reacted and turned around, saying, Elder Yu said in a low voice, "Lian Yangzi is exceptionally intelligent, so I'm sure you're also aware that the earth-hidden lotus might be easy to find, but even if we can find the Go Sunflower and the Snake Ring Jing, it'll probably take several years. Rather than going through so much trouble, it's better to settle things once and for all." Although Elder Yu didn't finish his sentence, Lian Yangzi still understood. Since the other party's magic treasure was so evil, then they'd first put the label of an evil sect cultivator on it and use it as an excuse to forcefully obtain the 3 treasures. She shook her head and said, "Taking things by force is never the right path. It's best if we can use spiritual herbs to exchange for them, but if we really can't find them." She hesitated for a moment. "We'll just have to think of another way." Seeing that her attitude wasn't too firm, Elder Yu knew that she was actually still somewhat tempted, so he chuckled and said, 3 months later, during the Southwest Dragon Pillar meeting with Xianyu cult, the sect master has selected 13 Yuanying enlightened masters to accompany him. Even Lian Yangzi's 2 sworn brothers are among them. If we have a handy magic treasure, our chances of survival will be much higher. Lian Yangzi bit her lip and said, "I'll think about it when I get back." Elder Yu didn't try to persuade her anymore and only said, "Intentionally or unintentionally, that's fine, but don't look at the fact that no one can obtain these 3 magic treasures right now. That's only because the news hasn't attracted the attention of the people in the sect yet. Wife, you need to hurry up. Even the 2 of us have heard of this news, so it's inevitable that others in the sect will also find out." Lian Yangzi nodded silently. At this moment, Elder Yu turned around and glanced at the immortal city entrenched in Inkheart Mountain, his eyes flickering uncertainly. Although the evil sects had perished, many of their superior cultivation methods were still passed down. This made him suspect that the person in charge of this immortal city, Mount Divine House, was searching for those flower spirit herbs to cultivate some kind of evil sect's cultivation method. They were even willing to take out high-grade profound artifacts so generously. It could be seen that the value of that cultivation method was even higher than that of a magic treasure. If he could obtain it, thinking of this, his heart burned with passion, but he immediately suppressed this thought. This matter wasn't something he could do alone. He needed to plan it slowly and couldn't be rushed. Mount Divine House's eastern boundary. A wisp of yellow smoke flew across the sky and landed in the barren mountain range. Zhang Boyan looked at a valley at the foot of the mountain. That place was shrouded in dense dark clouds, and a dusky haze filled the air. It was surrounded by high mountains, steep cliffs, and ravines. It could be said that it never saw the light of day all year round. He had already searched here for half a month, but there was still no trace of Gue Kue. However, a few days ago, he happened to meet a secluded cultivator in the mountains. After spending half a day in his cave abode, he was told by this person that there was an ancient desolate tomb here that might have what he was looking for. But when he arrived here, he discovered that the yin qi here was condensed. If one's cultivation was slightly weaker, they would be infected and their Dao body would be ruined if they got close. A look of joy appeared in his eyes. Ordinary cultivators would avoid such an evil place, but for an elder of the Nether Spring sect like him, it was rare. With a strange howl, his body swayed, and hundreds of demons flew out from behind him. They all landed in the valley and swallowed the yin qi in large mouthfuls as if they had obtained some great tonic. The demons that were originally the size of a man grew to about 3 meters in less than an hour. The yin qi that had accumulated for an unknown number of years had gradually thinned under its desperate absorption, and the situation within the valley was also revealed. Chapter 644. There was a bottomless pit below. Zhang Boyan focused his eyes and looked at it. Except for the thick pile of dead branches and leaves near the pit, it was still dark inside. However, he could sense that there seemed to be something hidden inside, and there was even a trace of cold air surging up. Within a radius of 10,000 miles, only this place had the densest essence. If there was a ghost sunflower in the mountain, it must be here. After looking at it for a few times, he did not take the risk to enter. Instead, he summoned several demons and ordered them to explore the way inside. After the 7 demons got his order, they jumped into the deep pit. After a while, he suddenly felt a sense of alarm in his heart. His eyes flashed and he immediately cast a spell. However, after calling several times, there was no movement. Zhang Boyan snorted. Even if the demon was scattered, it could gather again. At this moment, the connection between him and the demon was clearly not broken, but he could not summon it back. In such a situation, it could only be that it was trapped by something. He immediately leaped into the air and circled around the pit. Then, he stood in the air and made a gesture. This was a supernatural power that he had learned after following Zhang Yan. However, just as he was about to use it, his movements paused and he shook his sleeves to disperse the supernatural power. The power of this technique was extraordinary. Once it was used, it was enough to turn a few miles of land into a pool of mud. If there was a ghost sunflower inside and it was destroyed, it would not be good. He snorted and grabbed several balls of thunder out of thin air. He threw them into the deep pit. After 7 or 8 breaths, there was a muffled sound from inside, and there was a faint sound of something hissing. After listening for a moment, he smiled sinisterly. His body turned into yellow smoke and suddenly flew away from the original place. Just as he dodged, he saw a dark vine whizzing past where he was standing and smashed a mountain rock in the distance. Zhang Boyan's face flushed. He was extremely experienced in fights of magical powers. Since the other party was hiding in the deep pit, it would be very difficult for him to search for them. Moreover, it would be unwise to rashly go down, so he purposely stood right above the pit. He was using himself as bait. To lure it out, the opponent below was obviously not very clever. He just needed a little bait and it fell into the trap. That thing did not hit its target. It seemed to be very angry. There was a rustling sound in the pit. Millions of pale skeletons were squeezed out of the pit and piled up at the edge of the pit. Then, a strange flower of 10 feet rose from the pit. At first glance, it looked like a strange snake with a turtle's back. The petals were black in color, and the surface of the flower was shaped like a millstone. It was densely covered with fine seeds, and the leaves were serrated. The stem was thick and full of barbs. Wisps of black smoke lingered between the branches and leaves, and it was filled with the smell of decay. The 7 devils that went down earlier were stuck by the smoke, and they couldn't get rid of it no matter what. Zhang Boyan's eyes lit up. As a member of the devil doctrine, it was the first time to see such a ferocious plant spirit. He immediately had the idea of capturing it and refining it into a magic weapon. But when he took a closer look, it was clearly the ghost sunflower he was looking for. It was just that it was a bit bigger, so he did not recognize it at first glance. Zhang Boyan slightly narrowed his eyes. According to his original plan, if he found a few ghost sunflowers here, it would prove that there was such a thing in the mountain. If this place was not enough, he would have to look elsewhere. But now it seemed that he only needed to capture this one and it would be enough to report back. This ghost sunflower had been here for more than 3,000 years. It was time for it to transform, but because it was worried about the heavenly tribulation, it did not move. Therefore, it spent hundreds of years to gather the earth decay in Qi within tens of thousands of miles of mountain boundary, so that it could help it resist the heavenly thunder at the critical moment. But it did not expect that it would all be taken advantage of by Zhang Boyan. Therefore, it hated this old demon to the extreme. Suddenly, it let out a whistling sound like a wind cave. Dozens of vines rose hundreds of feet high and lashed at the sky. But Zhang Boyan was surprised. He slightly raised his body and dodged it. He waved his hand and a flag flew out from the astral cloud. He grabbed it and with a light wave, a black cloud hundreds of feet wide spread down and covered the ghost sunflower. In the blink of an eye, thousands of demonic smoke flew up and gathered into slender black hands. They densely grabbed the ghost sunflower, and in the blink of an eye, thousands of demonic smoke flew up and gathered into slender black hands. They densely grabbed the ghost sunflower, and in the blink of an eye, thousands of demonic smoke flew up and gathered into slender black hands. He pressed his hand down again, and there was a rumbling sound. The huge body of the ghost sunflower was immediately pressed to the ground. Although it twisted and rolled on the ground like a long snake, it could not struggle at all. It immediately let out a frightened hissing sound. The roots of the ghost sunflower were thousands of miles long. If it encountered a strong enemy, it could burrow into the ground and escape, moving the roots and the fruit to other places. Because he was afraid that it would escape, Zhang Boyan tied it up as soon as he came up. He originally had a few tricks up his sleeves, but he succeeded so easily. He was also a little surprised. He sneered coldly and said, "So you only have this ability? How dare you fight with me?" Although this ghost sunflower had cultivated for thousands of years, it was not a natural variant like the dragon carp or the flood dragon. Before it transformed, it did not have any supernatural powers. It might be able to deal with ordinary Yuanian cultivators, but how could it compete with an elder of the Netherworld Spring sect? After twisting for a long time, the black hands became tighter and tighter. Suddenly, the leaves on both sides of the ghost sunflower bulged, and with a poochie sound, as if something was being squeezed out, a black liquid shot out like an arrow into the sky. Zhang Boyan laughed strangely and said, "Come on." The high cloud above shook, and with a rumble, a black Yuanying flew out of the top of the door. It grew to 6 feet tall, opened its mouth, and sucked in the smoke arrow in an instant. This was originally a poisonous gas arrow refined by the ghost sunflower itself. It had always been successful against living creatures and cultivators, but in front of him, it completely lost its effect. Zhang Boyan activated his Xian Qi and refined the poison. Then, he shook his shoulder and dozens of green flames rose from the high cloud and danced in the air. This technique was called dark lamp green flame. Once it landed on a living being's body, it could burn it with its essence Qi. If there was no technique to restrain it, it would only be extinguished when the body was completely burned into a pile of bones. He had actually learned this method a long time ago, but he had never succeeded in practicing it until he borrowed the spiritual energy of the Blessed Enclave. He had never used it against an enemy, but now he used this ghost sunflower to try it out. Following his thought, dozens of fluorescent dark lamps floated down. When the ghost sunflower saw the attack of the flames, it was instinctively frightened. Its flowers and leaves swayed, forcing out wisps of grayish-white mist, which enveloped its body. However, those green flames had their own peculiarities. They passed through the mist without any hindrance and stuck to the stems and leaves of the ghost sunflower. The moment they touched it, it was as if a ladle of boiling oil had been poured on it, and the fire suddenly rose to a height of 10 feet. The ghost sunflower's body suddenly twitched, and it let out a painful howl. Although it was a plant spirit, and it was not easy for it to transform, it still had a skill. After cultivating for so many years, its body had long been as hard as gold and iron. Even a slightly weaker divine weapon could not cut it, but under this fire, it had no power to resist. After struggling for a while, the flower's surface suddenly opened up, and a plume of white smoke came out. Standing on top of it was a green-haired boy with a ponytail. He looked at Zhang Boyan hatefully and shouted at him, "I have no enmity with you, why do you want to harm me?" Zhang Boyan knew that it was his primordial spirit that had flown out. He revealed a hideous smile and said, "My sect master needs to borrow your body to refine pills. Don't pretend to be innocent. Just look at the millions of bones here, and most of them are human bones. I know you are not a good person." The boy's face turned pale. He hesitated for a while, and finally gritted his teeth and said, "Today, I know I can't avoid the disaster. If you have a way to turn me into a human, what's wrong with giving this body to you? Otherwise, I'd rather break my own roots and let my primordial spirit vanish than do what you want." Once the ghost sunflower's roots were broken, it would be completely useless. Zhang Boyan narrowed his eyes and did not speak for a long time, as if he was seriously considering it. After a while, he seemed a little reluctant and said, "Fine, I'll agree to it." The ghost sunflower was not at ease and said, "First, make an oath." Zhang Boyan did not hesitate and immediately made an oath. The ghost sunflower was relieved. His body flickered, and he took back his primordial spirit shadow. Then he saw his 10 feet tall body slowly shrink, and finally it was only 3 feet tall. Zhang Boyan raised his hand, and first took back the dark lantern. Then he shook his sleeves, and the thousands of black hands suddenly turned into several. They wrapped around the ghost sunflower a few times, and finally lifted it into the air. The ghost sunflower did not doubt him, and did not struggle at all. Instead, it obediently pulled out its roots and leaves from the soil, and let him take it with him. After successfully capturing the ghost sunflower, Zhang Boyan laughed wildly, rode a yellow wind, and returned to the direction of the deep cave Sex mountain gate. About half an hour later, the ghost sunflower suddenly asked curiously, "Taoist, I forgot to ask you, what kind of spell are you going to use to help me turn into a human?" Zhang Boyan perfunctorily said, "What kind of spell can I use to help you?" The ghost sunflower was startled, and his body struggled, and he shouted, "Just now, you've already made an oath. Do you want to break your promise?" Zhang Boyan burst into laughter and said, "How can this seat be coerced by a mere plant demon? Just now, I've only made a false oath." He had already seen that the ghost sunflower did not have much knowledge. Although he had heard of the name of the Dharma oath, he might not know what it was all about, so he was just pretending. In fact, the words of a Taoist cultivator's promise also contained profound meaning, but as a cultivator of the devil sect, deception was a common thing for him, so he naturally had a way to deal with it. Just now, the words spoken by the ghost sunflower had no binding force on him. After the ghost sunflower heard it, he loudly cursed. Zhang Boyan sneered a few times. If he was not worried that the loss of the primordial spirit might delay Zhang Yan's alchemy, how could he tolerate the ghost sunflower's clamor? After flying west for 3 days, he had already returned to the western boundary of the divine house. After another day and night, he rushed back to Zhangzhou Peak. The disciple on duty recognized him, so he had already opened the mountain gate's restrictive formation. He turned into a yellow smoke and went straight to the peak. When he arrived outside the cave, he stopped using his escape technique and landed on the open ground. Zhang Yan, who was meditating, had already sensed his return, so he waved his sleeve and opened the cave's stone door, saying with a smile, "It's only been 20 days, but Zhang has already returned, so you must have gained something." After Zhang Boyan entered the cave, he cupped his hands and bowed, then said, "Manor Master, I was also lucky to have caught a 1,000-year-old ghost sunflower, which can be used for Manor Master's alchemy." Chapter 645. 2 months later, Lady Lian once again came to Black Heart Mountain. This time, she brought a total of 12 hidden earth lotuses. Once she entered the floating tower, she took them out and said, "Taoist, do you think I can exchange these lotuses for a magic treasure?" The manager saw this and didn't dare to make a decision. "Please wait for a moment, my master will come over to discuss." Lady Lian smiled and nodded. The manager didn't waste any time and immediately used a flying sword to send a message. In less than 15 minutes, Zhao Gu arrived. After entering the hall, he carefully looked at Lady Lian. The last time he went back, he thought about it carefully. The figure of the other person was quite similar to the person who robbed him last time. However, he wasn't sure, so he buried it in his heart and didn't tell anyone. He was prepared to wait for the other person to come and identify him. But this time, the woman came alone and there was no trace of the other person. He couldn't help but feel slightly disappointed. Because of this, the woman was the same as him, also a core formation cultivator. She greeted him politely and then introduced herself. Lady Lian also greeted him politely. Zhao Gu looked at the lotuses and pointed, "Taoist Lian, which magic treasure do you want?" Lady Lian said seriously, "Taoist Zhao, I came to ask for 2 magic treasures." Zhao Gu said seriously, "Taoist Zhao, forgive me for being blunt. Although the 12 lotuses are valuable, they are barely comparable to 1 profound artifact. 2 is impossible." Lady Lian shook her head. "No, I can give the 12 hidden earth lotuses to your city lord." I only ask that you lend me 2 magic treasures. Lend? Zhao Gu was startled. He didn't expect her to make such a request. He pondered for a while and said, Taoist can wait for a moment. I need to report this to the sect master before I can reply. Lady Lian smiled and said, Of course, this servant will wait here. Zhao Gu didn't say anything more. He turned around and went to Cangzhou Peak to find Zhang Yan. Lady Lian sat quietly and waited. This time, in order to find these lotuses, she used a lot of her connections. Then she talked about it with a close friend. The latter thought, if it was just to deal with the Dragon Pillar Assembly, there was no need for him to exchange spiritual herbs. He could just borrow them for now. He could think about it later. In any case, when the Dharma treasure was in his hands, then it would be up to them to decide. Or he might as well borrow it and not return it. With the power and influence of the Zhongtai sect, it was not impossible. Hearing this reminder, Lian Yangzi was like dispelling the clouds and seeing the sun. He also felt that this was a good idea. After all, other than being difficult to find, the true value of the crouching earth lotus was incomparable to that of a profound weapon. However, in the next moment, Zhao Gu turned back and said, My sect master invites fellow Taoists to come over for a chat. Lian Yangzi stood up. Wan Fu said, Thank you for the trouble. Zhao Gu said, I don't dare. Fellow Taoist, please follow me. He made an inviting gesture and immediately led the way. When the two of them arrived outside the building, they used their escape arts and quickly arrived in front of the cave on Cangzhou Peak. The Taoist boy outside the door said, The sect master is waiting for the two of you. Lian Yangzi followed Zhao Gu into the cave. After walking for a short while, light appeared in front of her eyes. She saw a handsome Taoist sitting on a stone lotus, his body overflowing with spiritual qi. She couldn't help but be shocked. Because of what Elder Yu said earlier, she thought that this Taoist Master Zhang was a heretical cultivator. She didn't think that the other party was shrouded in spiritual clouds, his aura was pure, and his spiritual breath was vast and broad. With one look, she could tell that he was from the orthodox path. After calming down a little, she came up and greeted, This servant Lian Murong greets sect Master Zhang. Zhang Yan smiled. Fellow Taoist Lian, please sit. After Lian Yangzi sat down, he asked again, Fellow Taoist, junior brother Zhao has already told me why you're here. I just need to ask one more thing. May I know what you're borrowing this Dharma treasure for? When Lian Yangzi came, she had already anticipated that Zhang Yan would ask this question. After all, if she borrowed someone else's Dharma treasure and used it to commit evil, wouldn't she be taking the blame for someone else? Therefore, asking about the situation was also part of the question. She answered unhurriedly, I won't hide it from sect Master Zhang. My Zhongtai sect and Xianyu cult have always had enmity. These past few years, the disciples of the two sects have crossed swords several times, but there was never a clear victor. 2 months from now, there will be a battle in the southwest. 2 of my sworn brothers will also be accompanying me, so I wanted to purchase some protective items for them to increase their chances of winning. For a moment, Zhao Ji's expression became somewhat unnatural. He took a deep breath and said, So fellow Taoist Lian is a disciple of Zhongtai sect? Lian Yangzi smiled sweetly and said, I'm not a disciple of the sect, but I can still be considered a member of the sect. At this point, she paused for a moment before continuing, My master is the Zhongtai sect master. Zhao Gu immediately revealed a look of surprise. There was a reason why Lian Yangzi used this identity. Although the Shenwu mountain was located in a remote area, Zhongtai sect was still its superior sect in name, and it was also one of the 5 major sects of the present age. Borrowing this name, it would be much easier to negotiate the conditions. However, she had a sense of propriety and didn't put on an arrogant and bossy appearance. If she did, others would suspect that she was here to embezzle the transcendent artifact and not to have a good discussion. If she had the heart to resist, then it would be inappropriate. At this moment, seeing that Zhao Gu was moved, she also felt a bit proud in her heart. However, when she saw that Zhang Yan's expression did not change at all, this little bit of joy had to be put away. she thought to herself. This Zhang Jinren really can't be underestimated. She was well aware of her own situation. Although the disciples in the sect treated her with respect, if they were to really compare, they might not really like her. This was because her husband had more than 60 concubines, but she hadn't given birth to a son or a daughter, so she wasn't really favored by him. Zhang Yan did not need to think too much to know that this Lian Yangzi's status in Zhongtai sect was not high. Otherwise, why would she need to come here to trade for a talisman? However, even if the person who came was the favored concubine of Zhongtai sect, his attitude would not change even a bit. He pondered for a moment, then said with a smile, I can lend you the talisman, but I have a condition. Lian Yangzi's spirit was lifted. Sect head Zhang, please speak. Zhang Yan, please ask fellow Taoist Lian and your sworn brothers to come here in person. Only then can you borrow it. Lian Yangzi's body slightly straightened. She raised her voice and asked, Is Jinren afraid that I will borrow it and not return it? No matter, I will just write down a contract. Zhang Yan smiled but did not say anything. Zhao Gu timely interjected, This is the first time we have met fellow Taoist Lian, and we have not seen Lian Yangzi and your sworn brothers. There is a layer of separation between us, so it will be difficult to explain when the time comes. Lian Yangzi knew that the other party did not trust her, but even though she knew that this was the right thing to do, she still felt slightly uncomfortable. Moreover, she was very unwilling to do this. Originally, she could have done her two sworn brothers a big favor, but if the two of them came here in person, it would only be like acting as a middleman. Not only would the weight be much lighter than before, but it would also not win the two's gratitude. She squeezed out a smile and said, My two sworn brothers are diligently practicing Taoist techniques for the battle in 2 months, so they can't leave for the time being and have no time to come here. Could you make an exception? Although she was talking to Zhao Gu, she looked at Zhang Yan. Zhao Gu calmly said, There is no harm in waiting. When the two Taoists come, I will respectfully await your arrival. There is really no need to rush. Before Lian Yangzi came here, she had also inquired about the deep cave sect's background, so she still had some confidence. Clearing her throat, she said, Jinren Zhang needs subduing lotus. I'm afraid 12 stalks are not enough. If I have enough time to calmly search for them, it would not be difficult to find dozens or even hundreds of stalks. Today, could you consider the friendship between Shenwu Mountain and my Zhongtai sect and give me some face? This, Zhao Gu suddenly felt a little uncertain. At this moment, Lian Yangzi's bright eyes were staring at Zhang Yan. She said, When I came here, I heard that there seems to be some misunderstanding between Taoist Zhang and Taoist Huixian. To be honest, he and my master are brothers-in-law, so I can help to resolve the enmity. What do you think? Zhao Gu was a little startled and could not help but raise his head to look at Zhang Yan. Seeing that he did not say anything, he immediately knew what was going on and shook his head. This is my deep cave sex matter. There is no need for Taoist Zhang to worry about it. Although Lian Yangzi's position in the sect was not high, she was after all the Zhongtai sect leader's concubine. Wherever she went, everyone would give her some face, softly or forcefully said these kind words. Seeing that Zhao Gu still did not let go, she suddenly became a little impatient. She raised her eyebrows and said, With my identity, could it be that the two of you still do not believe me? Previously, Zhang Yan only watched from the side and let the two of them talk, but he had already seen that Lian Yangzi was very unwilling to his proposal. He still needed to seize the time to cultivate, so he did not want to waste any more time. He smiled slightly and said, Today, if the Zhongtai sect leader was sitting here, I would also reply the same. What a big tone. Lian Yangzi turned her eyes over and her eyes suddenly became a little colder. Who did this person think he was? He was just a cultivator from a foreign continent. How could he be compared to my master? Could it be that he really thought I was easy to bully after I talked nicely? She snorted, stood up, and did not even say a word of farewell, just turned around and left. Zhao Gu could not help but be a little worried. He said, Shi Xiang, this woman is after all the Zhongtai sect leader's concubine. Now that we have offended her, I'm afraid there will be trouble in the future. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, Junior Zhao, if this Lian Yangzi is really sincere, she would make a Dharma oath on the spot, willing to be a guarantor for her two sworn brothers. Wouldn't that save a lot of words? Moreover, she did not mention how long it would take for her to borrow it, which means that she has no intention of returning the treasure. In the end, this woman's intentions are not right. In my opinion, even if she borrows the treasure, when you come to ask for it in the future, you will definitely use all kinds of excuses to refuse. At that time, what is the difference between that and taking it away? Zhao Gu thought carefully. If the other party was not bound by the oath, it was indeed possible that she would do so, and he would not be able to do anything about it. In his heart, he said, "What Shi Xiang said is reasonable. This matter cannot be backed down even a little bit." At this time, he hesitated for a moment, then said, "Shi Xiang, I have something to report here. This matter may be related to that Lian Yangzi." After Lian Yangzi left Songzhu Peak, the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. She wanted to find someone to flatten the mountain gate of Cold Abyss, but now Zhongtai sect was busy dealing with Xianyu cult. Where would they have the energy to care about this place? Even on a normal day, with her status, she would definitely not be able to do this. At this time, she suddenly remembered Elder Yu's words, and a trace of hatred flashed through her eyes. She turned around, gathered up her pill fiend, and headed south. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.